Chapter 1406. Staring at Shi Xingyun, the Kunlun Dragon King let out a furious roar. He shook his huge body and broke free from Shi Xingyun's restraints. The eyes of the Kunlun Dragon King, who was waiting for Shi Xingyun, suddenly blinked. For a moment, the sky changed color. When the Kunlun Dragon King opened his eyes, the sky was bright, and it was day. When he closed his eyes, the sky was dark, and it was night. It was the Candle Dragon of the Dragon Tribe. The Candle Dragon Tribe could comprehend the passage of time, and the changes of the sun and the moon. It was extremely mysterious. The Kunlun Dragon King immediately revealed his true form. Rays of golden radiance were flickering on his body. When the dazzling pure golden radiance came into contact with the hazy radiance that Shi Xingyun had used to bind him, the two of them started to ripple like water. However, the world that had turned gray gradually regained its color. The Kunlun Dragon King's body was full of energy again. He was no longer sluggish and stiff. However, the Kunlun Dragon King's movements were a step slower because of Shi Xingyun's obstruction. On the other side, Shi Tianhao activated the body of the God of Rage and the body of the Abundant Yuan. He activated the spiritual bodies of the 12 divine generals and the city in the sky and attacked Zhu Yan. Although they were split into two, no matter if it was Shi Tianhao's surplus Yuan body, desolate God body, or the 12 heavenly generals' spiritual bodies in Sky City, there was a mysterious connection between them. They seemed to be independent, but at the same time, they seemed to be one. This caused their attacks to complement each other and become more powerful. Zhu Yan's expression changed slightly. He could clearly feel that even if his next attack could severely injure Xian Longxing and Celestial Dipper Swordsman, or even kill them, he would not have an easy time under Shi Tianhao's attack. Although he hated the Mount Shu sword sect, sword ancestor Ren Changmei was dead. He did not want to be buried with Mount Shu. Facing Shi Tianhao's attack, he suddenly turned around and quickly retreated. He instantly teleported through time and space, turning the distance between him and Shi Tianhao into a world. Now that Great Sage Zhu Yan had retreated, the Great Sage naturally had no intention of continuing to fight against the heaven-opening sword. Even if he were to fight, he would rather fight the Great Sage Zhu Yan's attack head-on, and cause damage to the Great Sage Zhu Yan instead of passively defending himself. The current leader of the Ape Clan displayed astonishing strength. He suddenly let out a deafening roar as he faced the sword light of the sky-opening sword that was slashing towards him. Around the Great Sage, black fog floated. Bright and resplendent stars lit up in the black fog. The stars and the black fog fused together, forming rays of black light. As the black light flowed, the Great Sage's demonic power and physical body's chi and blood burst out at the same time. The sword light that had pierced into his right shoulder blade was forcibly squeezed out by him. The eyes of Xian Longxing and Celestial Dipper Swordsman suddenly burst with infinite light, as if there was an infinite amount of sword light bursting out. After the sword light of the sky-opening sword paused, it continued to stab toward the omnipotent sage. However, the great sage stepped into the void. With a stomp of his foot, his whole body soared into the sky and directly disappeared into the firmament. Although it was not as mysterious as the ultimate agility, it was more rapid and violent. With a leap, he escaped the pursuit of the sword light of the sky-opening sword. However, after this leap, the great sage descended from the sky again, and returned to the front of the crowd in an instant. As he retreated and advanced, he seemed to be even faster than Xian Longsheng. The great sage stared coldly at Shi Tianhao and said, "Zhuri, you deal with Mount Shu and keep them from leaving the mountain. I'll deal with this guy." After saying this, the great sage leaped again. He was already in front of Shi Tianhao. Two giant black claws were clenched into fists. Like two giant hammers, they smashed toward Shi Tianhao's head. Shi Tianhao glared. The 12 divine generals above the body of the desolate god turned into 12 golden men and landed on the top of the city in the sky. His Yingyuan form was like a giant made entirely of thunder. It pounced on the body of the desolate god. Rolling thunder poured into the acupoints all over the body of the desolate god. Shi Tianhao looked up to the sky and roared. The body of the desolate god seemed to have doubled in size. Then he also punched towards the great sage. The power of the city in the sky and the 12 golden men were added to his body. At this moment, Shi Tianhao seemed to have transformed into a giant god. His power was extremely violent and domineering. He attacked the great sage without hesitation. In an instant, the two sides blasted thousands of punches between heaven and earth. The void was completely shattered and annihilated. The land of Mount Shu was almost completely barren. The scene was bloody and violent. It attracted the attention of great sage Zhu Yan, Xian Longsheng, Shi Xingyun, and the others at the side. After the Great Lane Temple's Dharma-ending realm, the Divine Land had not seen such a scene for a long time. A cultivator of the human clan was fighting a great demon of the Dharma-ending realm head-on in close combat. On the other hand, the powerful cultivators of the Buddhist clan used the Vairocana palm. Although it was a domineering method to subdue demons, it was also peaceful and natural. It was far from what Shi Tianhao was doing. At this moment, everyone felt like they were watching two great demons of the Dharma-ending realm with extremely powerful bodies fighting each other. Deep purple thunder patterns appeared all over Shi Tianhao's body. The 12 golden men, and the city in the sky above his head also fell into the top of his head at this moment, completely merging with him. At this moment, Shi Tianhao, whose body was growing rapidly, also had his head reaching the sky and his feet on the ground. His head was about to break through the sky and become as huge as the great sage. From the acupoints all over his body, countless blood qi rose and condensed in the void into the figures of chaos, Tao Tai, Qiongqi, Flame Dragon, Ancestral Crocodile, White Jade Dragon, and even the primordial Celestial Dragon. They roared together with Shi Tianhao. Every punch that Shi Tianhao threw seemed to trigger the endless power of the primordial era. Thousands of great demons followed, and the momentum was earth-shattering. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them in shock. They watched as Shi Tianhao wrestled with the great sage, who was the strongest among the demons of the Dharma-ending realm in terms of pure physical strength and blood qi. It seemed that Shi Tianhao was not at a disadvantage at all. The great sage stared at Shi Tianhao with a cold expression. He also roared angrily. Black light flowed all over his body, and he suddenly leaped up and appeared behind Shi Tianhao. Then he turned around and clawed at Shi Tianhao's temples. As the terrifying power surged, the great demon shadows on Shi Tianhao's body began to dissipate even before it reached him. Even the thunder patterns on his temples shook violently as if they were about to shatter. Although his body was extremely huge, Shi Tianhao's movement was as fast as the great sage. He did not seem clumsy at all, and in fact he was even faster. He suddenly crouched down and dodged the great sage's ear-piercing attack. Then his huge body was as agile as a raccoon. He spun on the spot and faced the great sage. Then he clawed fiercely at the great sage's chest and abdomen. Shi Tianhao's temples were hit by the great sage's fists. Even if his head did not explode, he would be seriously injured. If Shi Tianhao's claws hit him, he would also be able to cut open the great sage's abdomen. Before the great sage's claws missed, he had already kicked at Shi Tianhao. Shi Tianhao exhaled and shouted. His left and right hands separated, one above and one below. The momentum of his left hand did not stop, and it continued to grab at the great sage's chest and abdomen. His right hand clenched into a fist and smashed down. When this fist smashed down, the void, which was already in ruins, immediately collapsed and was annihilated into layers of chaos. At this moment, the chaos was frozen by Shi Tianhao's terrifying fist power. For a moment, the chaos could not be reborn into the void. All the power of creation in this void was swept up by Shi Tianhao's fist and gathered at one point. Accompanying it was a desolate and chaotic primordial aura. The desolate and primitive aura, and the exuberant vitality seemed to have merged into one at this moment. Xianmen Tianzong Lin Feng's direct martial arts, the Yin and Yang Guthyuan true scripture. This was the Yin and Yang Guthyuan hammer. Shi Tianhao's fist smashed down and collided with the great sage's leg, which was surrounded by black light. Both of their bodies suddenly shook violently, and at the same time, they seemed to lose their balance. The great sage's body tilted slightly, and he almost fell. An ominous glint flashed in his eyes. He steadied his body, and the two giant claws that had missed before also fell together, grabbing at Shi Tianhao's back. Shi Tianhao smiled fiercely, and his claws didn't stop grabbing at the great sage. He turned a blind eye to the great sage's attack, and wanted to fight back with attack. When the two sides collided, heaven and earth shook violently. Countless drops of blood essence drifted down to the ground, turning into a sea of fire. Except for the area where Xian Longsheng, Sword Venerable Tiangang, Kunlong King, and the others were standing, everything in the sea of fire was instantly vaporized into nothingness by the scorching heat. Shi Tianhao's left hand directly opened up a terrible wound on the great sage's chest and abdomen. One could even vaguely see the pulsating internal organs inside. His heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and 5 viscera and 6 bowels were as huge as mountains. None of them had the color of blood, but they were golden like crystal glass, emitting a dazzling brilliance that was even more dazzling than the stars. The injury on Shi Tianhao's back was even more terrible. The great sage's fist and claws had smashed it into a pulp, and even broken bones could be seen in the mess of flesh and blood. The bones were like crystals, flashing with colorful brilliance. Wind, thunder, water, and fire, they burst out as the bones were broken, and countless divine lights filled the world. However, Shi Tianhao and the great sage didn't seem to feel the horrifying injuries at all. The great sage stared at Shi Tianhao, and his blood-red eyes suddenly changed into a deep black color. 2 intense black lights erupted from them, and they hit Shi Tianhao's head. Shi Tianhao didn't dodge. He raised his head, and his whole head suddenly turned golden, looking somewhat similar to the 12 golden statues. The black lights shot out from the great sage's eyes hit Shi Tianhao's forehead. Even his seemingly indestructible golden skin was suddenly hit, and 2 dents appeared, covered with dense cracks. But at this moment, a dazzling brilliance flickered between Shi Tianhao's eyebrows. It was the divine light of termination, and it turned into a destructive rainbow, cutting off everything in its way, and shot toward the great sage's head. All the black hair on the great sage's body stood on end. Ignoring his right leg, which had temporarily become numb after colliding with Shi Tianhao's yin and yang Guthuan hammer, he forcibly exerted force and leaped into the sky, narrowly avoiding Shi Tianhao's divine light of termination. The two sides fought a series of bloody battles, and it was only at this moment that they temporarily distanced themselves from each other. The great sage looked at Shi Tianhao, who seemed to have turned into a bloody man. He saw that Shi Tianhao had retracted the divine light of termination, and another divine light of origin fell, and began to rapidly heal his injuries. Chapter 1407. The great sage stood in the void. His chest and abdomen were bleeding, and his internal organs could be vaguely seen in the huge wound. The flesh and blood around his wound kept wriggling, trying to heal, but the progress was extremely slow. Shi Tianhao's claw contained a massive amount of chaotic qi of desolation, which made time and space seem to stand still. Everything could not be born, and the qi of life could not be gathered. Even the great sage, a great demon with an extremely strong body, could not heal his injury in a short time. The great sage stared at Shi Tianhao with a livid face. His body was even a little crooked, and his center of gravity was completely on his left leg. His right leg, which had collided with Shi Tianhao's yin and yang Guthuan hammer, was a little numb. Later, in order to avoid Shi Tianhao's divine light of termination, he had forced himself to leap into the sky. As a result, his right leg, which was already a little inconvenient to begin with, was now even more stiff. The great sage had precise control over his body. He could clearly feel that the bone marrow in his right leg was fluctuating and shaking uncontrollably. At the place where his fist collided with Shi Tianhao's fist, countless tiny blood vessels burst, and his meridians were twisted and torn. Shi Tianhao, who was below, also looked up at the great sage. The injury on his back was even more serious than the great sage's. There were 2 dents on his forehead. If he had not displayed the divine sense of the eternal golden body at the moment when the great sage's attack was about to hit him, his head might have been pierced by the great sage. After his right hand collided with the great sage's right leg without any fancy moves, the circulation of his qi and blood also felt sluggish. But at this moment, a ray of light that was completely different from the divine light of termination rushed out from between Shi Tianhao's eyebrows. It seemed to contain all things, including the mystery of the changes of the desolation. This light triggered the emergence of countless patterns of light waves, which turned into layers of auspicious clouds that enveloped Shi Tianhao's body. Immediately, the injuries on Shi Tianhao's forehead and back began to heal rapidly. It was not a cure, nor was it a reversal of time, nor was it a transformation of the real and the false. Instead, in the blink of an eye, it made him seem as if he was in the most perfect state he had been in at the beginning. Even the slightest change would cause everything to return to its original state. The 2 dents on Shi Tianhao's forehead quickly disappeared, as if he hadn't suffered the great sage's attack at all. The injury on his back was quite terrifying, and there was also the remnant of the great sage's demonic power and demonic aura, which slowed down the rate of recovery. However, it was still healing at an astonishing speed. The great sage didn't just stand there and watch. Instead, he let out a long roar and forcefully suppressed his injuries before attacking Shi Tianhao again. The great sage had heard of the miraculousness of Shi Tianhao's divine light of origin. When the 2 sides were fighting each other, the great sage was already mentally prepared for this scene. Therefore, at this moment, he didn't hesitate to rush toward Shi Tianhao. He wanted to interrupt Shi Tianhao's recovery process with a rapid attack, forcing Shi Tianhao to continue attacking him. He had already suffered a blow from the heaven-opening sword before, and now he was injured on top of that. If he waited for Shi Tianhao to fully recover, the situation would be disadvantageous to him. Shi Tianhao laughed. The divine light of origin between his eyebrows suddenly disappeared, and the divine light of termination shot out once again, hitting the great sage who was attacking him. The 2 sides fought again, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. You attack me with a punch, and I attack you with a claw. The 2 huge figures moved in all directions, as if they were everywhere, but it was hard for people to see where they were. Deafening roars and roars sounded in the void. Some of them were from the great sage, and some were from Shi Tianhao. The scene in front of them didn't seem to be a battle between a human and a demon, but 2 primitive beasts that were fighting fiercely. Even Gu Jun, Xian Longsheng, Sword Venerable Tiangang, and Shi Xingyun were stunned by the scene. Such a scene hadn't been seen for many years. Most of them were only mentioned in the relevant records of the Archean epoch. It was the time when the human race rose and fought with the demon race. Shi Tianhao and the great sage were fighting fiercely. They fought from the east to the west, and the whole scene was the most eye-catching. However, the other battles had also reached the climax. Shenlong King, who had been trapped by Gu Jun and the Longevity Lotus, had already rushed out of the Sea of White Lotuses with a deafening dragon roar. Shenlong King's body was flashing with golden light, and there were waves of air rolling in the light. The earthy yellow air waves were as heavy as the earth. It was the Yellow Dragon clan's innate skill. After it evolved, it became the Earth Chi in the center. The waves rolled forward like the sea. It was the Sea Dragon clan's innate skill. It could control the essence Chi of the infinite water elephant, and move like a boundless ocean. Like the transformation of plants, a dark green color spread in the void. It was also the Yellow Dragon clan's innate skill. After it evolved, it became the wood elephant creation Chi that was full of vitality and everything grew. The rolling waves of fire turned into a boundless sea of fire. The crimson red light raged everywhere. It was the Fire Dragon clan's innate skill. It could control the fierce and domineering dragon fire, and burn the world. Rays of black light kept flashing. They were heavy and condensed. However, at the edge of the light, there were rays of blinding white light that looked like sharp swords. It was the Black Dragon clan's innate skill. After it evolved, it turned the toughest into the sharpest and formed the Chi of the Golden Elephant. The Chi of the 5 elements kept changing, and formed a mysterious and domineering destructive force. It crushed the White Lotuses and carried Shenlong King out of the Sea of Flowers. At this moment, Gu Jun and the Longevity Lotus had already appeared in front of Shenlong King. However, Shenlong King did not attack Gu Jun. Instead, he rushed towards Shi Xingyun. Gu Jun's expression did not change. His left hand kept changing the hand seals while his right hand reached out his index finger and lightly tapped on the Longevity Lotus below him. At that moment, the Longevity Lotus seat suddenly opened up. The 18 petals turned into 18 balls of light. Then, they formed a straight line and shot towards Shenlong Wang one after another. In the golden light around Shenlong King, all kinds of exquisite great Tao appeared at the same time. One of them contained many principles. Apart from the Fire Dragon clan, the Yellow Dragon clan and the Black Dragon clan's innate skills, the Hui Dragon Clan's ability to move through space and time, and the Candle Dragon Clan's ability to manipulate time were also present in him. He broke through the void at high speed, causing the Longevity Lotus attack to miss. However, he did not stop moving. His target was still Shixingyun. However, Gu Jun performed the hand seals with both of his hands. Then, he combined the hand seals with both hands and formed a straight line of 18 balls of light. They seemed to have formed some kind of strange formation, radiating rays of light. Under the illumination of the light, Shenlong King's movement suddenly paused. He could not help but want to throw himself into the formation formed by the balls of light. A cold light flashed in Shenlong King's eyes. He seemed to be enraged. Gu Jun carried the Longevity Lotus and fought with Shenlong King in the void. On the ground, Xian Longsheng, Celestial Gang Swordsman, and Great Saint Zhu Yan were also engaged in a fierce battle. Everyone in Mount Shu, including Xian Longsheng and Tiangang Sword Venerable, still guarded the foundation of the sect. Although all the peaks of Mount Shu had been destroyed, everyone was still united. The Sword Will and Sword Qi converged into one furnace, and together, they added to the sky-opening sword to fight against Zhu Yan. Although Celestial Gang Swordsman's cultivation was higher, and he had a breakthrough in his understanding of swordsmanship, he still had the foundation of divine sword Qi. At this moment, he did not take over the heaven-opening sword. Instead, he presided over the sword formation and strengthened his sword will and sword Qi to Xian Longsheng. He was also injured in the battle with the great sage. At this moment, even if he held the heaven-opening sword, it would be difficult for him to fight against Great Saint Zhu Yan alone. It would be better for him to gather everyone's strength. Xian Longsheng's face was as pale as paper, but the hand holding the sword did not waver. Even if he attracted the spiritual qi of the world to form the sword edge, his hand seemed to be heavy as if he was holding a side of the world, but he was still stable. He stabbed the sword, and the sword light dispersed. Great Saint Zhu Yan stared coldly at Xian Longsheng, Celestial Gang Swordsman, and the others. He launched his magic power, and his mountain-like body seemed to be ethereal. When he wanted to attack the people of Mount Shu Sword Sect, the distance that was far away in the sky became close in an instant. It seemed that no matter how his opponents retreated, they still could not avoid his attack. Even if they moved in the void like him, they still could not open the distance. When Great Saint Zhu Yan wanted to avoid his opponent's attack, he was close in the previous moment, but in the next moment he was already far away in the sky. No matter how his opponents approached, how they increased their speed, and how they broke through the void to catch up, it seemed that they could not get close to him. The distance between them was even getting farther and farther. Between heaven and earth, Great Saint Zhu Yan, like a white jade mountain, moved back and forth, leaving fiery footprints in the void as if they were real. The sword light of the sky-opening sword was extremely powerful. It flickered between heaven and earth, shrinking and changing. Even with Great Saint Zhu Yan's amazing magic power, it still could not overpower the brilliance of the sky-opening sword. When Great Saint Zhu Yan retreated, the sky-opening sword followed. Although it was not as fast as before, it was still hard for Great Saint Zhu Yan to ignore. When Great Saint Zhu Yan attacked, the sword light of the sky-opening sword could also block his way in time, making it difficult for him to attack. Neither side could do anything to the other, but Great Saint Zhu Yan was not in a hurry. He looked to the other side from time to time. There, Shixingyun was withstanding the storm-like attacks of the Kunlun Dragon King. At this moment, the Kunlun Dragon King's expression was cold. There was not a trace of anger or hatred in his eyes, only coldness. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was as if the sun and the moon were rotating. The mysterious magic power kept breaking Shixingyun's protective light. Wherever the golden light around the Kunlun Dragon King reached, the black and white space would regain its color, and the flow of time would return to normal. He shuttled back and forth in the void and launched a series of rapid attacks at Shixingyun. His attacks were getting faster and faster. Although Shixingyun had refined the immortal dragon city into her body and recovered part of Tian Longjin's memory and experience, she was still not an expert in the Dharma-ending realm. Under the unpredictable series of attacks of the Kunlun Dragon King, it was easy for her to be distracted. However, Shixingyun had clearly anticipated this. She defended herself by remaining calm and guarded her own line of defense, avoiding the Kunlun Dragon King's weakness and dealing with him. However, among all the battles at the scene, her side was undoubtedly the most dangerous and disadvantageous one. Chapter 1408. The eyes of the Kuan Dragon King were filled with cold murderous intent. His ferocious attacks rained down on Shi Xingyun like tidal waves. Shi Xingyun was at a disadvantage, but she did not lose her composure. She continued to deal with the Kuan Dragon King. Although the misty light around the gigantic body of the heavenly dragon was fading away, Shi Xingyun did not panic. When the Kuan Dragon King pounced at her again, Shi Xingyun slapped the gigantic head of the dragon. The eyes of the dragon suddenly opened. The body, which was even larger than the Kuan Dragon King, swayed in the void. Majestic golden light shone, triggering many mysterious concepts and merging them into one. It was the innate magical concept of the primordial celestial dragons. It was as if she was the supreme ruler of the heavens. Billowing golden clouds of dragon might surged from the scales of the gigantic dragon. Shi Xingyun's eyes flashed and became the same as the dragon's eyes. She let out a long roar that shook the heavens. The giant dragon beneath her also opened its mouth wide and let out a soul-stirring roar. Even Xian Longsheng, Great Saint Zhu Yan, Sword Venerable Tiangang, Gu Jun, and the others felt their minds trembling when they heard it. The Kuan Dragon King and Shen Dragon King were both shocked and enraged. Not only was Shen Dragon King restrained by Gu Jun, but the Kuan Dragon King also opened his mouth and let out a deafening roar. The heavenly voice of Dragon King versus the heavenly voice of Dragon King. The violent sound waves formed one golden ripple after another, rolling and vibrating in the void. It completely condensed into a substance and spread far away, crushing the surrounding space and sweeping away everything in its path. The entire West Shu, along with the mountain peaks that were thousands of miles away, collapsed like wheat being harvested. The earth shattered. Where the two golden light waves came into contact, the waves were all dispersed. Everything in the space where the two waves came into contact was turned into nothingness. When the two heavenly voices of the Dragon Emperor clashed, the deafening sound became softer. However, no one dared to underestimate the destructive power of the two heavenly voices. Meanwhile, in other parts of the vast land of the Divine Land, even if they were far away, everyone could still hear the terrifying dragon roar, which kept echoing in their ears for a long time. Amidst the furious roar of the dragon, the Kunlun Dragon King swam against the current and approached Shi Xingyun. He then fiercely clawed at the head of the giant dragon. Shi Xingyun's eyes flickered. The giant dragon beneath him also raised its claw and charged towards the Kuan Dragon King. Both parties clashed head-on. The scales on the Kunlun Dragon King's body opened and closed, and there were mysterious runes flashing on every dragon scale. Even though he was enraged, the Kunlun Dragon King had a wealth of battle experience. He mainly focused on close combat, but he kept changing his attacking methods, which made Shi Xingyun dizzy and overwhelmed. The primordial sky dragon was one of the top existences among all the demons in the world when it came to melee combat. To the Kuan Dragon King, his strength was not only limited to his physical body and the power of his qi and blood. Like the omnipotent sage and Shi Tianhao, close combat was also his forte. However, Shi Xingyun was not good at melee combat. Even though he had awakened part of Tian Longjin's memories, he was still no match for the Kunlun Dragon King. Even though the giant dragon beneath him was powerful, the Kunlun Dragon King's constant attacks and changing rhythm made Shi Xingyun feel like he was in a difficult situation. The Kunlun Dragon King was enjoying the fight. A cold gleam flashed across his eyes. The right front claw that was previously broken by Lin Feng was now glowing with a golden light. Streams of blood and meridians flowed towards his right claw. Kunlun Dragon King activated his energy and temporarily reconstructed his right front claw, making it look exactly the same as before. On the surface of the dragon's claw, there were streams of black watery light moving constantly on the golden dragon scales. It looked similar to the Black Sea that was covered in golden light and black water. The Kunlun Dragon King suddenly regained his strength and struck out with his right front claw. Shi Xingyun was caught off guard and could only move the giant dragon's head slightly. Even though he managed to dodge in time, the the Kunlun Dragon King's claw still managed to grab his neck. The Kunlun Dragon King exerted more force on his claw, trying to penetrate the giant dragon's neck. He did not waste his time over the years. The dragon tribe's research on the power of the Black Sea is getting deeper and deeper. Shi Xingyun frowned. He has only temporarily reconstructed his broken claw. It won't take long for him to recover his broken claw. The giant dragon's neck was also covered in golden dragon scales. There were also many runes floating on the scales, increasing his defense to the maximum. At the same time, the misty light that resembled the river of time appeared again, and infected the Kunlun Dragon King's claw. The golden dragon claw that was glowing with black light was covered in a layer of grayish-white luster. It was as if time had stopped. The true meaning of eternity, immortality, and indestructibility appeared on Shi Xingyun's body. His defense was raised to the maximum. The Kunlun Dragon King bellowed furiously and roared continuously. The light on his claw broke through the grayish-white luster and continued to attack the giant dragon's neck with his powerful attack. The two of them were in a stalemate, one attacking and the other defending. However, Shi Xingyun's heavenly voice of the Dragon Emperor started to fade. On the other hand, the Kunlun Dragon King's heavenly voice of the Dragon Emperor lasted for a long time and still shook the 9 heavens. After a long period of fighting, Shi Xingyun's soul power was greatly depleted. Shi Xingyun looked at the Kunlun Dragon King with a solemn expression. Her eyes flickered and she subconsciously looked in the direction of Shi Tianhao, Gu Jun, Xian Longsheng, Honorable Swordsman Tiangang, and the others. After a moment of silence, she suddenly slapped the giant dragon's head. The giant dragon's body shook and started to twist. The Kunlun Dragon King's claw shook. He felt that he could no longer hold on to Shi Xingyun. Although Shi Xingyun started to break free from the Kunlun Dragon King's grip, her defense started to weaken. She could no longer defend herself against the Kunlun Dragon King's piercing claw. The giant dragon roared and struggled to break free from the Kunlun Dragon King's claw. However, there were many wounds on its neck. It looked as if its throat had been torn apart. The Kunlun Dragon King's gaze was cold and cruel. Trying to escape? He continued to pounce forward, tearing the space apart and leaving more wounds on the giant dragon's body. As a misty light flowed like the river of time, the giant dragon's body glowed brightly. The wounds on its body healed rapidly, as if time was flowing backward. However, Shi Xingyun, who was on the dragon's head, let out a muffled groan. Although her body was formed by light and shadow, it was as if her body was made of flesh and blood. Bloody wounds appeared on her slender neck, and her yellow robe was also stained with blood. She risked being injured by the Kunlun Dragon King, and urged the giant dragon to soar into the sky. She fled in another direction. However, the void was in a state of chaos due to the ongoing battle. The 4 battlefields were separated and overlapped, blurring the communication with the surroundings. Shi Xingyun's escape did not allow her to leave the battlefields. Instead, she was still traversing the battlefields. She needed to reorient herself in the chaotic space and time and find the right path. From afar, one could see a dazzling ray of light flying between the heavens and the earth. It was twisting and turning, and it often turned back. It looked like a headless fly, but it was actually because the void was in a state of chaos. Shi Xingyun continued to walk in the right direction. The Kunlun Dragon King followed closely behind her. His speed was faster and more agile than hers. Every time the Kunlun Dragon King caught up to her, Shi Xingyun had to pay a price to escape. The 2 giant dragons chased each other and stopped occasionally. In the midst of the flashes of light, 2 giant figures flashed past them. They were Shi Tianhao and the Great Sage, who were fighting each other to the point that blood splattered all over the place. Seeing that Shi Xingyun was in danger, Shi Tianhao let out a long roar and leaped forward, shaking off the Great Sage and rushing towards the Kunlun Dragon King. How could the Great Sage let go of his opponent? His giant body leaped into the sky and instantly caught up with Shi Tianhao, attacking him. Shi Xingyun turned around to look at the Kunlun Dragon King, then looked at the injured Great Sage. She did not continue to escape and let Shi Tianhao deal with the 2 doomsday demons. Instead, she turned around and faced the Great Sage, taking over the opponent for Shi Tianhao. Regardless of whether the Great Sage's combat power was stronger or weaker than the Kunlun Dragon King's, at least he would not be as decisive as the Kunlun Dragon King. Even if the ape tribe and the dragon tribe were to form an alliance, they would not fight to the death for the sake of their mortal enemy. As they brushed past each other, Shi Tianhao and Shi Xingyun were ready to exchange opponents. At this moment, the Kunlun Dragon King stared coldly at Shi Tianhao. With a long roar, he ignored Shi Tianhao, who was attacking him, and continued to attack Shi Xingyun. At this moment, he was willing to take a blow from Shi Tianhao to kill Shi Xingyun. The Kunlun Dragon King was confident that even if he were to take a blow from Shi Tianhao, he would at most be severely injured. He might even be able to retain a considerable amount of combat power. Then he could slowly deal with Shi Tianhao together with the Great Sage. Now that Shi Xingyun was suddenly attacked by the Kunlun Dragon King and the Omnipotent Sage, she was at risk of dying on the spot because of her weak strength. Being attacked by the two Doomsday Demons from the front and the back, she did not even have the space to dodge. However, at this moment the Great Sage, who was facing Shi Xingyun, furrowed his brows. Shi Xingyun's gaze was calm and peaceful. She did not appear to be trying to stay calm, but was actually panicking. At this moment, Shi Tianhao, who was attacking the Kunlun Dragon King, suddenly raised his hand. It was as if he was holding up a boundless starry sky in his palm. Boundless light surged in his palm. One could only see the dazzling light, but one could not see what it was. However, the onlookers could clearly feel that there seemed to be an invisible roulette spinning continuously within the light. As the roulette spun, it was as if the entire universe was spinning at the same time. The will of the entire boundless universe was awakened. It was the Great Celestial Wheel. The Kunlun Dragon King's expression changed drastically. Such an attack was not something that he could withstand with his body. However, it was too late for him to react. Shi Tianhao combined his primordial god of desolation with the help of the Sky City and the 12 metal men. He lifted the Great Celestial Wheel and smashed it down on the Kunlun Dragon King. Boom! As the world shook violently, it was as if the heavens were collapsing and being destroyed. Vaguely, it seemed as if countless universes and worlds were being destroyed at the same time. The terrifying power converged and poured down. The destructive power landed heavily on the Kunlun Dragon King's waist. Chapter 1409. If Shi Tianhao had activated the Great Celestial Wheel during his battle with the Great Sage, the Kunlun Dragon King would not have dared to take a blow from Shi Tianhao head-on. The Great Celestial Wheel, the Supreme Imperial Palace, and the Ding of Shenzhou were all owned by Xianmen Tianzong. This was a well-known fact. Both the Great Sage and the Kunlun Dragon King knew about it beforehand. Although the Omnipotent Sage had previously fought with Shi Tianhao to the point of causing sparks to fly everywhere, he had always been vigilant in his heart to guard against Shi Tianhao's treasures. His ascending to the heavens' magical power had always been on guard against Shi Tianhao's powerful attacks. After all, the Great Sage had been fighting with Shi Tianhao for a long time, so he was always on guard. However, as time went by, both sides were covered with injuries, and Shi Tianhao still did not reveal any trump cards. On the other side of the battlefield, the Kunlun Dragon King, Shen Dragon King, and the Great Sage Zhu Yan were gradually deceived. At this moment, the shocked and furious Kunlun Dragon King had completely understood that Shi Tianhao did not only want to defeat them and force them to retreat, but he also wanted to inflict serious injuries on them. He even wanted to keep them in the Divine Land forever. Shi Tianhao had been waiting for an opportunity to inflict serious injuries on them, so that they would not be able to escape in time. Shi Xingyun's previous escape was also intentional. It was to bait the Kunlun Dragon King, so that the Kunlun Dragon King would send himself to Shi Tianhao's Great Celestial Wheel. If it was only Shi Tianhao's attack, the Kunlun Dragon King was confident that he could withstand it head-on. Even if he was severely injured, he could still guarantee that his attack would hit Shi Xingyun. However, now that Shi Tianhao was attacking him with the Great Celestial Wheel, such a violent attack would even exhaust the Kunlun Dragon King's energy, making it difficult for him to inflict any effective damage on Shi Tianhao. He would have to suffer Shi Tianhao's attack in vain. Back when Shi Tianhao had just reached the Return to Void stage, the Kuan Dragon King had been forced into a disadvantageous position by Shi Tianhao's Sky City. the 12 metal colossi, Ding of Shenzhou, and the yin and yang life and death formation. Even though the Kuan Dragon King was a prideful man, he knew his place and adopted reasonable strategies to deal with Shi Tianhao's attacks. He did his best to defend himself, evade, or put his life on the line. Even if he was defeated and killed, at least he would have the leeway to counterattack. But at this moment it was like opening the door to a thief, instantly sending himself into a dangerous situation with a slim chance of survival. This was the fatal strike that Shi Tianhao and Shi Xingyun had planned for a long time. The timing was perfect, leaving no chance for the Kunlun Dragon King. The Kunlun Dragon King was enraged. He wanted to evade, but the terrifying attack that seemed to be able to cause the sky to collapse completely locked his body in place. He wanted to use his full strength to inflict severe damage on Shi Xingyun and make him pay. However, he was a little too late. This attack was so close, yet so far away. He wanted to counterattack and make Shi Tianhao suffer. However, it was too late to change his attack. Even if he struggled to counterattack, he would not be able to inflict any effective damage on Shi Tianhao. In fact, he might not even be able to defend himself even if he gritted his teeth and concentrated all his strength to take this attack. The Kunlun Dragon King let out an earth-shattering roar. He had been careless and ended up in such a state. He was filled with resentment, and he would not be able to cleanse himself even if he tried. In the end, he still used all his strength to pounce toward Shi Xingyun. However, the great celestial wheel had already smashed heavily into his body. A loud boom sounded between heaven and earth, and the entire vast thousand realms seemed to tremble. The gigantic golden heavenly dragon stretched across the sky, but its body made a strange bend. With this bend, the world seemed to have been dislocated. It was as if it had been split into two by a knife. Then it went up and down, and the scenery was broken and intertwined. Time and space seemed to have lost their color at this moment, turning pale and blurry. The violent airflow continued to blow in all directions, causing the other people who were fighting nearby to look askance. Everyone fixed their eyes on the Kuan Dragon King, and saw that the golden radiance on his body had dimmed. His waist was drenched in blood, and the scales on his body had all burst open. Together with his blood and flesh, they rained down a golden rainstorm from the sky. When the scales landed on the ground, they were like mountains. When the blood dripped onto the ground, it turned into a golden lake. Hot air rose from the lake, scorching the surrounding land. The Kunlun Dragon King's huge body was almost split into two at the waist. If not for his primordial celestial dragon body being so strong, his body would have been split into two by Shi Tianhao. Even so, there was only a small amount of flesh and blood left. His bones were all broken, and his tendons and meridians were all broken. The Kunlun Dragon King didn't even feel the pain at first. He only felt that he couldn't control the back half of his body. His undying demon soul also shook violently and was damaged along with his true form. In his sea of consciousness, the dragon shadow formed by the demon soul was only left with the front half, and the back half was gradually disintegrating. Looking at the Kunlun Dragon King's condition, even the great sage and Zhu Yan great saint felt their hearts skip a beat. They could vaguely feel a chill in their lower bodies. The usually calm Shen Dragon King let out a deafening roar, and let Gu Jun hit him with the longevity lotus. He endured the pain and rushed towards the Kunlun Dragon King. A mysterious pattern appeared on Shen Dragon King's forehead. It flashed brightly, and a black light shot out and landed on the Kunlun Dragon King. The Kunlun Dragon King's body trembled, and then the same pattern appeared on his forehead. The pattern turned into an illusion of light and shadow, communicating with the mysterious sea. Waves surged in the mysterious sea, and a majestic force passed through the endless void and came to the empty sea, trying to bring the Kunlun Dragon King back to the mysterious sea. The Kunlun Dragon King wanted to resist this time, but he couldn't. He was too badly injured and his strength was at rock bottom. But at this moment, Shi Tianhao, who looked like a mighty god, said, "Do you think that the mysterious sea ritual of the dragon race is omnipotent?" His voice spread out and shook the divine prefecture. It was as if a god had descended. Shi Tianhao waved his hand, and a ball of purple energy flew out. Within the ball of purple energy was a tree branch. It looked thin, But when the purple energy dissipated and revealed the tree branch's true appearance, it was thousands of feet long and dozens of feet thick. The leaves on the branch were about an acre in circumference. They were green and full of vitality. It looked as if the branches were still on the tree, and not plucked by someone. The tree branch swelled in the air as it faced the wind. The surrounding purple chi was all absorbed into its body. In the end, the tree branch branched out and flickered with 7-colored precious light that illuminated the heavens. It looked similar to the mysterious sky treasure tree on the top of the Jade Capital Mountain. The giant tree branch turned into a beam of light, and plunged into the mysterious sea illusion of the Kunlun Dragon King's divine prefecture. The mysterious sea illusion of the mysterious sea was occupied by the tree branch and started to shrink. Stimulated by the power of the tree branch, the waves in the mysterious sea that were originally calm suddenly rose and rolled towards the tree branch. The leaves on the tree branch kept shaking and the 7-colored light was worn down. Gradually the light dimmed. But Shen Dragon King's eyes were filled with despair. Being trapped by the tree branch, the Kunlun Dragon King couldn't return to the mysterious sea through the mysterious sea ritual. Although it was obvious that the mysterious sea ritual would be able to completely crush the mysterious sky tree branch in a short period of time, the Kunlun Dragon King was in danger. After the attack, Shi Tianhao had no intention of holding back. He raised the great celestial wheel in his hand again, as if he was lifting up the heavens and realms again. A look of determination appeared in the eyes of the Kunlun Dragon King. He mustered all the remaining strength in his severely injured body, and attacked Shi Xingyun once again. At this moment, Shi Xingyun was fighting with the omnipotent sage, and was already at a disadvantage. Hence, it was difficult for him to survive the Kunlun Dragon King's attack, and he was once again injured by the Kunlun Dragon King. However, as the Kunlun Dragon King was already severely injured, he was unable to unleash much of his strength. Hence, Shi Xingyun was able to endure the injury and evade the omnipotent sage's attack. On the other side, Gu Jun also knew that the battle had reached a critical juncture. He moved the longevity lotus throne to entangle Shen Dragon King. Shi Tianhao stood in the void like a deity. He raised the great celestial wheel in his hand and smashed it down again. This time, the attack hit the top of Shi Xingyun's head. Once again, there was a violent wave in the sky. Countless rays of light exploded and shot in all directions. At this moment, a huge golden silhouette of a heavenly dragon appeared in the sky. It covered the heavens and looked down on all living beings in the vast 1,000 worlds. However, the eyes of this mighty heavenly dragon seemed lifeless at this moment. Then, the silhouette of the heavenly dragon started to shatter, causing thunderous sounds to be heard in the surroundings. The light pulsated intermittently and fluctuated continuously. The great demons of the age of cultivation decline were closely related to the vast 1,000 worlds. Their death would even cause some changes in the weather. Today, the second most powerful figure in the dragon race, second only to the Yuanlong King, the primordial heavenly dragon who had dominated the great heaven primordial world for countless years, had died in the divine land of the human race. The one who killed him was the 7th disciple of the celestial emperor of Huang, Lin Feng, the celestial emperor of Huang, Shi Tianhao. Ever since Lin Feng killed Yudu in the war between the two worlds, he was the second great demon of the age of cultivation declined to die in recent years. The death of the Kuan Dragon King shook the vast 1,000 worlds. On the east sea of the divine land, which was located in the west and east of Shushan, there was suddenly a violent storm. Waves rolled continuously, and demonic aura surged from the realm passage that connected the East Sea to the vast infinite wasteland. It seemed to be extremely violent and angry. A mighty dragon roar came from afar. It came from the vast infinite wasteland and resounded throughout the divine land. Everyone knew that it was the roar of the current master of the dragon race, the Yuanlong King. The death of the Kuan Dragon King was so sudden that even the Yuanlong King was caught off guard. The anger in his heart was uncontrollable. However, at this moment, in the sky above the East Sea, Xian Li, who was sitting cross-legged at the entrance of the realm passage, suddenly stood up. She raised her right hand, and light flowed in her palm, gathering into a long sword. The blade of the sword was filled with chaotic and blurry colors. It was as if everything had come to an end and creation had turned into nothingness. At the edge of the blade, there were two flowing lights, one black and one white, flowing and sliding around the edge of the blade. The terrifying sword will make people tremble with fear. Xianli took a step forward and passed through the realm passage, arriving on the vast infinite wasteland. At this moment, she raised the blade high and slashed it down. Chapter 14:10. In the vast thousand worlds, the endless evil aura that signified destruction and destruction all gathered in the sword in Xianli's hand, forming an invisible pillar of air. The pillar of air condensed into a world-destroying blade, and the entire world seemed to be facing its end at this moment. Xianli slashed out with her sword, and the mysterious sword light streaked across the void, targeting the Yuan Dragon King in the distance. As she slashed out, the clouds in the Ying Sea shattered, the waves in the Xian Sea surged, and the stars in the Star Ocean were destroyed one after another. Void storms raged in the empty sea, and the southern wilderness of the Divine Land even cracked open, revealing thousands of calamities in the Nether Sea. Xianli's sword shook the five seas of heaven essence, and it was extremely domineering. The void of infinite wilderness suddenly cracked open, and an incomparably huge golden heavenly dragon appeared from within. There seemed to be streams of light on the heavenly dragon's body, spreading in all directions in the vast thousand worlds. The heavenly dragon felt the terrifying power contained in Xianli's sword, and its eyes darkened. Patterns flashed on its forehead, and a large amount of golden seawater that flashed with black light suddenly appeared around its body. An illusion of light and shadow appeared behind it, and the waves in the Xian Sea surged and dazzled, flashing continuously. However, the ritual did not guide the heavenly dragon back to the Xian Sea. Instead, a large amount of water from the Xian Sea was sucked into its body, causing the heavenly dragon's aura to rise further. The golden seawater that was originally flashing with black light suddenly changed color, turning into black seawater that flashed with golden light. The golden light and black sea surrounded the heavenly dragon, and its power continued to rise. Within the golden light and black sea, there were even stars floating, causing the heavenly dragon to feel as if it was in a golden sea of stars. The heavenly dragon roared and a golden light shot out, sweeping up the water of the Xian Sea and the stars in the sky, turning into a golden heavenly river that met Xianli's terrifying sword light. In the vast thousand worlds, streams of light pulsed in the void, and then they all shattered, emitting an ear-piercing wail of the great Tao. This wail was extremely ear-piercing at first, but it became low, hoarse and incomprehensible. The golden heavenly river was extremely dazzling, but it was filled with the intent of destruction. Wherever it passed, it left a destructive scar on the entire vast thousand worlds. There was only one person in the current dragon clan who had such strength, and that was the current clan leader of the dragon clan, a great demon in the tribulation stage, Yuan Dragon King. Unfortunately, his opponent was even more violent, tyrannical, and ruthless than him. Wherever the mystic glass sword pointed, the terrifying light shattered the golden river, the black water, the innate demonic power of the dragon tribe, and the countless dazzling stars. The ear-piercing wail of the Grand Tao was instantly cut off at this moment, and it was completely silent. The terrifying sword light arrived in front of the Yuan Dragon King, slicing through the black sea of golden light around his body. It also sliced through the demonic energy treasure light around his body, as well as his powerful body that was at the middle tribulation stage. It was truly indestructible and invincible. The Yuan Dragon King let out a low roar, and the mysterious sea of light and shadow behind him became even more violent. The mountains howled and the seas roared, and it was already completely chaotic. The golden light and black water became even more majestic, and it pushed the Yuan Dragon King back into the mysterious sea. However, it could not change the fact that he had been injured by the mystic glass sword. Golden dragon blood filled the sky like a mist, and it scattered across the vast Tianhuang mainland. Silently, Xianli stood between the heavens and the earth. Her expression was cold, and her gaze was indifferent. There was no change in her expression. The violent changes in the East Sea, and the grand Tao of the heavens and earth faintly trembled. The great sage and the others in Shushan also felt it. Shi Tianhao was not surprised at all. He turned his head to look at the omnipotent great sage, who looked like a giant god. The great sage's gaze was cold and solemn. He looked into Shi Tianhao's eyes, and it felt like thousands of years had passed in that instant. In the end, he let out a muffled groan, and his body suddenly leaped forward, shaking off Shi Xingyun, and was about to ascend to the sky. However, a light rose from the top of Shi Tianhao's head. The Sky City and the 12 metal colossi flew out from the light above his head, and the 12 metal colossi transformed back into the 12 heavenly generals in the void. The 12 heavenly generals shouted together in the void. Immortal. Void. Instrument. Shu. Celestial. Yi. Ng. Tian. Zhu. Chaos. Wholeness. Subjugation. The 12 heavenly generals turned into 12 balls of light in the void, and then joined together to form a blue sky, restoring the original appearance of the azure sky all heavens formation. It merged with the Sky City, and its power became even greater. At this moment, the great celestial wheel rose slowly and returned to the azure sky all heavens formation and the Sky City. It hung high in the sky, and as the light wheel rotated, the world seemed to rotate together with it. The great celestial wheel, the Sky City, and the azure sky all heavens formation above Shi Tianhao's head seemed to have merged into one at this moment. As the great celestial wheel rotated, the blue sky covered tens of thousands of miles, and it continued to expand into the distance, as if it was about to envelop the entire divine land. Although no one present had seen it with their own eyes, at this moment, the heroic appearance of the heavenly emperor, the master of the heavenly gates, who dominated the world during the last years of the ancient era, flashed before their eyes. At this moment, the person who appeared in front of them was not the mighty heavenly emperor, but another existence with an even more domineering concept of power. A cultivator who was only at the spirit refining returning to void realm, in the cultivation world, could not even be considered a teenager. His Tao law concept was even more profound than the ancient orthodoxy of the heavenly gates in the past. At this moment, the concept of power revealed by the great celestial wheel, the Sky City, and the azure sky all heavens formation was different from the past. Although the state of power had not recovered to its peak, the aura concept was more profound and profound. Shi Tianhao looked coldly at the great sage. The blue sky above his head opened up, and streams of airflow surged and intertwined with each other. All of a sudden, the momentum of the omnipotent sage's leap became sluggish, and he was no longer as powerful as before. His heart sank slightly. Sure enough, he saw the great celestial wheel flash and disappear from where it was. The next moment, it appeared above his head. Following this, the great celestial wheel smashed toward him, and the power of the Sky City and the azure sky all heavens formation was added to it. The great sage threw a punch and collided with the great celestial wheel. As a result, his upward momentum was completely disrupted, and he had no choice but to descend. The great celestial wheel flashed in the void and instantly disappeared. When it reappeared, it was right in front of the great sage. The vast energy that swept through the myriad of Daos in the world shook the universe. And under the clear sky formed by the Jade Fall formation, there was a profound concept that existed everywhere and moved according to one's will. It was both overbearing and agile, and its might was even more ferocious. Shi Tianhao moved and instantly disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was right next to the great celestial wheel. He picked up the great celestial wheel and charged toward the great sage. Although Shi Xingyun was also seriously injured, he still urged the giant dragon under him to rise into the sky and attack the great sage together with Shi Tianhao. The mysterious heavenly tree branch that had frozen the Xianxi light and shadow illusion had already been swallowed by the Xianxi water. Not only had the colorful light around it disappeared, but the tree branch itself had also turned into ashes and disappeared. However, the Xianxi ritual, which could be used again, was still in a state of stillness. Because the target it was supposed to summon, the Kunlun Dragon King, had died. All that was left was his giant corpse, floating in the void and slowly falling to the ground below. On the other side, Shen Dragon King's eyes were filled with sorrow and anger. His demonic aura became extremely violent. Gu Jun controlled the Longevity Lotus throne, and carefully dealt with him. While he was preventing Shen Dragon King from suddenly attacking with his life, he was still trying his best to trap him. The situation of the battle in Mount Shu was completely different now. Shi Tianhao had killed the Kunlun Dragon King. Although he, Shi Xingyun, Xian Longsheng, and Celestial Dipper Swordsman were also seriously injured, the Great Sage was also seriously injured. Shin Dragon King was also injured by Gu Jun when he tried to rescue the Kunlun Dragon King. The precarious situation for the human tribe had been completely reversed after Shi Tianhao killed the Kunlun Dragon King. If they attacked too quickly, the demons would fight back desperately, and some human experts would inevitably suffer casualties. However, the longer the battle dragged on, the more advantageous it would be for Gu Jun and the others. Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman had been fighting for a long time, and their injuries had gradually worsened. However, they had no intention of retreating. They still urged the sky-opening sword and stared at Great Sage Zhu Yan. Great Sage Zhu Yan's expression was extremely ugly. For a moment, he was also in a dilemma. The Kunlun Dragon King was dead, and Yuan Dragon King could not break through Xianli's obstruction. Their situation suddenly became extremely difficult. Looking at Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman, Great Sage Zhu Yan was full of reluctance. Even with the sky-opening sword, the strength of Mount Shu sword sect was still weak at this moment. If he and the Great Sage were willing to work together, they still had the confidence to destroy Mount Shu as long as they were willing to pay a certain price. However, all of this seemed to be just a fantasy at this moment. What made him even more conflicted was that if he missed this opportunity today, his chances in the future would probably be even slimmer. Thinking of the domineering power of the 4 great demons of the Age of Cultivation Decline who had descended on Mount Shu together, and ended up like this, Great Sage Zhu Yan was furious. However, if they continued to fight, even if they could kill a large number of human experts, they might all follow the footsteps of the Kunlun Dragon King and perish here. Great Sage Zhu Yan looked up to the sky and sighed. He suddenly turned around and flew away from Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman. The sword light of the sky-opening sword followed him like a shadow, chasing after Great Sage Zhu Yan all the way. However, Great Sage Zhu Yan activated his magic power to the extreme and focused on escaping. He soared into the sky, his 4 feet trampling the void like flames, leaving trails of flames behind. He also opened a path in the void manifested by the Azure Heaven formation. The omnipotent Great Saint quickly followed, following the path that the Great Saint Zhu Yan had opened up. Shen Long King's expression was cold, but he had no choice but to retreat. However, Shi Tianhao still activated the Great Wheel of Heavens, still chasing after the Great Sage and Great Sage Zhu Yan. In the void, Xian Longsheng, Celestial Dipper Swordsman, Shi Xingyun, and Gu Jun also followed, chasing after the Great Sage and the other great demons, not letting go of this rare opportunity. Great Sage Zhu Yan let out a strange laugh. You should worry about the people of Xianmen Tianzong in the Nether Sea first. Chapter 1411. Yuan Dragon King was pushed back by Xianli, and was forced to retreat to the mysterious sea. Kunlong King was killed by Shi Tianhao. The 3 demons, the Great Sage, Shin Dragon King, and Zhu Yan, were all injured. Facing the pursuit of Shi Tianhao and the others, they could only retreat pathetically. After witnessing how Shi Tianhao blocked the ritual of the mysterious sea with the dark heavenly branch and killed Kunlong King, Shin Dragon King could not activate the ritual anymore. Although Yuan Dragon King had retreated to the mysterious sea, the ritual would be more powerful under the control of the ritual. Even if Shi Tianhao took out another dark heavenly branch, it would soon be destroyed by the ritual. It would not take long. However, Shen Long King did not dare to take any risks at this moment. If Shi Tianhao and the others gave up on Omnipotent Sage and Zhu Yan Great Saint and besieged him together, the delay might decide his life or death. Even if Yuan Dragon King attacked, he had to be wary of Xian Li's obstruction. Shin Dragon King had no choice but to retreat with the Great Sage and Zhu Yan. In order to avoid being blocked by Shi Tianhao and the others, the 3 demons of the cultivation declining stage did not use the realm passage from the southern wasteland of the divine land to the vast land of infinite wasteland. They would rather escape through the outer domain void, and then find their way back to the great Kiliacosm. Shi Tianhao and the others followed closely behind and chased after them. The 2 sides fought and stopped, turning the void into a wasteland and destroying countless stars in the universe. Zhu Yan was furious from being chased. He said with hatred, "You guys helped the Mount Shu sword sect to guard the mountain. Let's see if you, Xianmen Tianzong, can still be so happy after losing the harvest in the underworld sea." Shi Tianhao stared at the great saint of Zhu Yan. He had a feeling that the other party was not bluffing and was not shooting his mouth off. During the battle, Shi Tianhao had felt uneasy. But during the battle, he was focused and suppressed these thoughts. Before he was about to participate in the Battle of Shushan, he had once contacted his eldest senior brother Xiao Yin once again, asking about the specific circumstances of the sudden change in the Netherworld Sea. In the end, Xiao Yin simply said that it was fine, and told him not to worry, and then the communication was cut off. Being in the same sect for many years, Shi Tianhao knew Xiao Yan's character very well. Even if he really faced a difficult and dangerous situation and the pressure was huge, Xiao Yan would still take it on by himself. However, the Underworld Sea was not a place that anyone could enter. Those who did not know the Underworld Sea would only be attacked by the evil power of the Underworld Sea. Great Saint Zhu Yan let out a strange laugh. Although the number of people who entered the Nether Sea is not as many as those who entered the Spirit Sea, it is also very lively at the moment. There are more than 1 or 2 families who dislike your celestial sect. Golden Cicada suffered a great loss at your master's hands back then. This time, I'll get back at you. How could he enter the Underworld Sea? Even the future glazed Buddha, Lord of the future constellation, could only go through danger. He thought, wait, Shin Tze has been missing all these years. Neither our sect nor Taishu Temple could find his whereabouts. Could he have turned to Buddhism? It was absurd to think about it. But when Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple, and even the king of the underworld and Taoist Yu Ming wanted to get even with him, he could still hide without leaving a trace. The mystery behind it was quite thought-provoking. Just thinking about it made one feel that it was absurd, but under the situation where he was not accepted by the Celestial Sect of Wonders and the Void Temple, and even the Emperor of the Underworld and Taoist Yu Ming wanted to settle the score with him, he was still able to hide his tracks without revealing a single trace. The profoundness behind it was rather thought-provoking. But he did not show any clue on his face. Instead, he looked at Zhu Yan with a faint smile. You don't seem to have figured out the situation. You'd better worry about yourself first. As he spoke, Shi Tianhao suddenly jumped. He held the great celestial will high in one hand and stretched out the other. He clenched his fist and shouted, "Universe!" As he spoke, Shi Tianhao's figure suddenly leaped forward. He raised the great celestial wheel with one hand and stretched his other hand forward. He clenched his fist and shouted, "Universe!" The universe formula combined with the power of the azure sky all heaven formation, and the city in the sky. The blue sky shrouded the field, causing the entire void to almost solidify and be fixed on the spot. Even Zhu Yan felt that his body was becoming more and more sluggish. It became extremely difficult to break through the shroud of the blue sky realm. Zhu Yan was also a veteran of many battles. After feeling that his talent of turning a short distance into a world was vaguely restrained, he knew that Shi Tianhao would have follow-up attacks. He was also someone who had been through hundreds of battles. When he felt that his so close to the end yet so far technique was restricted, he knew that Shi Tianhao would follow up with another attack. However, the expected attack did not come, which made Zhu Yan slightly puzzled. But all of a sudden, the white jade-like hair all over his body stood up. He felt a great sense of crisis. The next moment, the void where he was exploded and shattered uncontrollably. Shattering the void was not something worth mentioning for Zhu Yan the great saint. Not to mention him, even the monkeys under his knees could do it. However, the shattered void was not the space around Zhu Yan's body, but the space where his flesh and blood body and demonic soul were located. At this moment, Zhu Yan only felt that his body could not be restrained, as if it was about to shatter from the inside out. The Zhu Yan demonic ape clan was a demon clan that mastered the principles of space and achieved their talent. But at this moment, Zhu Yan felt that he could not stop the sudden shattering. He forcibly activated his demonic power to stabilize the teleportation space, but the flesh and blood on one of his hind legs were still violently twisting and shaking. There seemed to be faint cracks on Zhu Yan's left leg. The cracks were not blood vessels, muscles and bones, but pitch-black holes, as if the space had been torn apart. However, from this crack, there seemed to be a faint sound of rolling thunder. It was as if there were invisible thunderbolts exploding in the void, trying to shatter the space. Zhu Yan's expression was stern. This thunderbolt is somewhat similar to the void tribulation thunder during the nascent soul formation, but it is much stronger. Moreover, I can't even detect its whereabouts. There are also traces of the 9 heavens formless astral wind and the void storm, which I have never seen before. What on earth is this? The invisible thunderbolt shattered the void as if it was born out of thin air, without the slightest trace or trace. It could appear in any corner of space and time according to Shi Tianhao's will, making it impossible to guard against. This was a brand new thunder method created by Shi Tianhao after he reached the realm of spiritual cultivation and returned to the void. He used his heavenly virtue scripture as the foundation, combined with the 9 heavens divine thunder, the 9 heavens formless astral wind, the void storm, and his own understanding of the principles of space and the power of wind and thunder. It was the 9 heavens formless void tribulation thunder. It was a brand new thunderbolt that had never appeared in the Tianyuan Great World before. It could shatter the void and everything with just a thought. It was born anywhere in the void, untraceable, and yet it seemed to be everywhere. The 9 heavens formless void tribulation thunder did not have this ubiquitous quality under the blue sky formed by the azure heaven formation, but it had its own mystery. Zhu Yan shouted, and his whole body flashed with a white jade-like luster. The red flames on his 4 feet all turned green, and the green demonic fire covered his whole body. He used all his strength to stop Shi Tianhao's magic power, so as to prevent his left leg from being shattered by Shi Tianhao's 9 heavens formless void tribulation thunder. But in this way his movement suddenly became slightly stagnant, and his flying speed slowed down. Shi Tianhao lifted the great celestial wheel with his right hand and smashed it at the great sage, while his left hand turned into a claw and fiercely grabbed at Zhu Yan. Zhu Yan limped slightly and dodged to the side. But on the other side, Xian Longsheng and Celestial Gang Sword Venerable, one driving the sky-opening sword, and the other the ancient sword Celestial Gang, attacked, forcing Zhu Yan's way, leaving him nowhere to hide. Shi Tianhao grabbed his arm. Zhu Yan roared and increased the strength of his hand, wrestling with Shi Tianhao, trying to delay Shi Tianhao's movement, so that the great sage could attack. At this moment, Shi Tianhao cast the 9 heavens formless void tribulation thunder, mainly manifesting the power of the Inyuan form. Although his physical strength was also enhanced by the city in the sky and the azure heaven formation, it was inferior to the level when he wrestled with the great sage. Although the power of Zhu Yan's flesh and blood was inferior to that of the great sage, it was still quite strong. He attacked Shi Tianhao without backing down. But Shi Tianhao just smiled. Streaks of tribulation thunder of the void of the 9 heavens silently, and without warning exploded in various parts of great Saint Zhu Yan's body. Zhu Yan's body stiffened again. The green demonic fire flickered, resisting the 9 heavens formless void tribulation thunder. Xian Longsheng and Celestial Gang Sword Venerable's attacks also fell on him, forcing him to defend with all his strength. On the other side, Shi Xingyun urged the giant dragon under him to reach its claws at the great sage, temporarily blocking his movement. The great celestial wheel in Shi Tianhao's right hand suddenly changed direction and smashed at Zhu Yan's head. This creation magic treasure was not like Ding of Shenzhou, which could be used to refine elixirs, nor did it have all kinds of mysterious changes like the longevity lotus, nor did it have all kinds of magical powers like the Supreme Imperial Palace. It was also not like the Golden Nirvana Bridge, which could guide heaven and earth and carry the momentum of humanity. The great celestial wheel's biggest feature was its vastness. It seemed to be a powerful force that could mobilize the heavens and realms to suppress the enemy. The heavens rotated and destroyed all directions. The great celestial wheel, which had been enhanced by the city in the sky and the azure heaven formation, and driven by Shi Tianhao with all his strength, seemed to have smashed the Kunlun Dragon King to death not long ago. As it rotated, it seemed as if layers of universes were being destroyed at the same time. The creation was overturned, and it fell on Zhu Yan. Zhu Yan roared and tried to dodge, but his claws were caught by Shi Tianhao. He could only try his best to cut open the vital parts of his head. Then the invisible light will fell on his shoulder. With a loud bang, the boundless world seemed to tremble slightly. The void where Zhu Yan was completely shattered, and there was even a terrifying power of the realm stirring back and forth. In the midst of Zhu Yan's screams, the arm that Shi Tianhao grabbed was smashed off at the shoulder by the great celestial wheel. Countless drops of blood essence drifted in the void. Great Saint Zhu Yan roared, abandoned his arm, and desperately fled into the distance. On the other side, the celestial reaching saint also let out a series of roars and fled quickly. Shenlong King did the same and fled quickly. Shi Xingyun and the ancient Emperor Gu Jun followed. Xian Longsheng and Celestial Gang Sword Venerable did not stop. They set up Sword Light and continued to chase after the three big demons. Chapter 14:12. The Great Sage was injured, Shen Longwang was injured, and Zhu Yan the Great Saint was severely injured. Although Xian Longsheng, Honorable Swordsman Tiangang, and Shi Xingyun were also injured, they were in a better condition compared to the three great monsters. Furthermore, with Gu Jun and the Longevity Lotus leading the way, they would not feel too much pressure when facing the omnipotent sage, and the others unless the situation suddenly changed. After communicating with Gu Jun and the others, Shi Tianhao stopped his pursuit. Light shone from between his brows, and the divine light of origin fell again, healing the remaining injuries on his body. He stared at the void sky and thought for a moment. Then he opened his palm, revealing a talisman that flashed with dark red light. The word Yan was written on the talisman. It was a talisman specially made by Xiao Yan. It was not easy to make, and even Xianmen Tianzong had a limited number of them. It could help people other than Xiao Yan to enter and exit the Nether Sea. Although they would still be attacked by the violent disasters of the Nether Sea, it was relatively easier. Shi Tianhao crushed the talisman, and it immediately turned into a dark red light stream. It was dark and gloomy, almost black. A whistling sound came from the light stream, making one's heart palpitate as if they were facing the end of the world. The dark red light stream broke a crack in the void sky, and from the crack, a chilly wind that looked like black rays of light rushed out. Wherever the chilly wind went, the world was completely frozen. It was the Nine Serenities' chilly wind. Following closely behind the Nine Serenities' Yin wind was the endless astral baleful qi, which looked like a red haze of light, also rushed out from within. The extremely stinky, filthy blood river also flowed out, followed by the mysterious heavenly tribulation flame, the nether evil flame, and the yellow springs true water, all of which followed closely behind, stirring and spreading in the void. Shi Tianhao looked at the crack of the Nether Sea in front of him and frowned slightly. It's more chaotic than before. It seems that Big Brother is indeed under a lot of pressure. He stepped into the crack and walked in the Nether Sea step by step. Everywhere he went, there was like an invisible passage. The passage seemed to be invisible, but a large amount of destructive power seeped in and attacked Shi Tianhao. The passage in front of him was much more difficult than what Shi Tianhao knew, but it was not a problem for him. As he moved forward, Shi Tianhao looked into the distance outside the passage, and saw countless natural disasters and earthly tribulations rushing in this world without a moment of peace. A large number of disasters gathered together, forming an extremely chaotic situation. Through the chaotic scene, a huge red light pillar could be vaguely seen, piercing through the Nether Sea. The pillar of light stood there motionlessly, as if it was the only stable place in the Netherworld Sea. However, it gave off an even more palpitating and uneasy feeling. From where Shi Tianhao was, he felt an indescribable distance from the red pillar of light. Under the layers of space folding, it was hard to describe the distance between the two with distance. That red pillar of light seemed to be in any part of the space and time in the Netherworld Sea, yet it was very far away from Shi Tianhao. If it wasn't for Xiao Yan's talisman leading it, it would be hard to reach it even after countless years. Tian knew that the red light pillar was the ownerless creation treasure of the Nether Sea. It was the manifestation of Tian Yu's power. In the past, there were many worlds within the Nether Sea that depended on Tian Yu. They were like huge bubbles in the Nether Sea, not connected to each other. They seemed to surround Tian Yu, but they were separated by layers of space. In the past, there had been many dark sea realms and inner realms attached to heavenly disaster. They were like giant bubbles in the dark sea, not connected to each other. They seemed to surround heavenly disaster, but they were actually separated by layers of space and time. And at this moment, those worlds within worlds seemed to be glued together, forming a single world. Although it was still possible to see the original shape of the barrier, it was already showing signs of merging. The many worlds within worlds revolved around the red light pillar, forming a huge ring shape. That huge ring space domain was also flashing with red light. Shi Tianhao looked over, and saw that above the huge red ring, there were a few existences facing each other. One of them was sitting cross-legged. He was 9 zhang tall, and below him was a huge flame lotus. Blue-purple, pure gold, milky white, and other colors flickered, like a giant god of fire. This person had a black and white Tai Chi pattern on his forehead. His facial features were the same as Xiao Yan's. It was Xiao Yan's return to void dharma physique that he had obtained after training his spirit to return to the void. His body flickered with indescribable light. One moment it was dazzling, and the next moment it was dim. It was like a remnant flame in a pile of ashes, flickering between bright and dark. It was never completely extinguished, and there were signs that it would reignite at any time. In Xiao Yan's eyes, the effects of the Nethersea's calamities flickered. There was also a dark red luster that undulated, making him look unusually fierce. And in front of Xiao Yan, there were other people on the huge ring. There was one person alone. It was a youth in white. His robes were embroidered with white clouds, the symbol of Taishu Temple. This person was naturally the Grand Elder of Taishu Temple, Wu Mingqi. Inheriting the legacy of his predecessors, he could also enter the Nether Sea and draw upon the power of the Nether Sea. It was just that his expression was slightly solemn. His eyes flickered with a strange light. His gaze moved back and forth between Xiao Yan and the others, but there was no joy in it. In the distance, the person who was facing Xiao Yan was a man dressed in a black dragon robe. He wore a flat crown on his head. His aura was so dignified that it made people want to bow their heads. The man looked to be in his 30s, but he was dignified and dignified. In the eyes under the crown, there seemed to be a deep black light flashing. His gaze didn't give people a feeling of fierceness or coldness, but it was like the deepest and darkest existence. It was silent and senseless, as if everything had returned to eternal rest. But in the aura that was like the world after death and the netherworld, there seemed to be a thriving vitality. It played out the mystery of the cycle of life and death, causing death to not seem so cold and terrifying. Although his appearance had changed and he had grown into the figure of a young man, whether it was Xiao Yan, Shi Tianhao, or Wu Mingqi, they could all recognize that the person in front of them was the king of the underworld who had been in seclusion. The last time the king of the underworld appeared in front of the world was during the war between the two realms. Since then, he had been in seclusion and there was no trace of him. And when he appeared this time, Xiao Yan and the others could feel that the magic power of the king of the underworld was much stronger than before. It was as if he had returned to the peak of his power in the ancient era. It had been less than 30 years since he had truly been reborn in the vast thousand worlds. The mysteriousness of the king of the underworld's magic power made Xiao Yan, Shi Tianhao, and Wu Mingqi, who came from the two peak forces of the divine prefecture, feel some admiration. This was no longer reincarnation, but a true resurrection from the dead. The king of the underworld's expression was calm and peaceful. His gaze also fell on Xiao Yan. Beside him stood a middle-aged man dressed in traditional clothes. He had a calm and indifferent expression. His eyes were like water, and there seemed to be no fluctuations in his emotions. Wu Mingqi looked at this middle-aged man with an extremely complicated gaze. This was because this man was the second-generation abbot of the Taishu Temple in history, Yan Xinghe. Wu Mingqi's master was from Wen Qiang's faction. But now, in terms of ideology, he was already different from Wen Qiang and his followers. Wu Mingqi himself was one of the leaders of the radical faction in the Taishu Temple. His ideology was completely different from Wen Qiang's, and he was even more radical than Yan Xinghe. As if sensing Wu Mingqi's gaze and recognizing his origin, Yan Xinghe also looked at him, but his expression did not change. Yan Xinghe, who had been refined into an evil soul by the king of the underworld, was still very calm when facing his junior successor. It was as if he did not feel embarrassed or angry. There was no joy, no guilt, no anger. All emotions seemed to be hidden in that watery gaze, without a single ripple. Looking at the picture of the white clouds on Wu Mingqi's clothes, Yan Xinghe's gaze was as calm as ever, without a single ripple. Wu Mingqi, however, felt a sense of sorrow. Many of the rules of the Taishu temple, including the clothing and etiquette, were set by Yan Xinghe when he was in charge of the temple. Many of them were still in use, including the white cloud symbol on the clothes. Yan Xinghe sized up Wu Mingqi, nodded slightly, and then looked away, as calm as ever. Shi Tianhao's gaze swept across Wu Mingqi, the king of the underworld, and Yan Xinghe, then fell in another direction. There stood two people. One of them was a handsome young monk dressed in gray. It was Golden Cicada, whom he had not seen in a long time. At this moment, Golden Cicada was sitting in a lotus position, and beside him sat another young monk. He was dressed in a black kasaya, and his entire body was also emitting the precious light of the Buddhist sect. His body was like colored glass, and there were 18 golden lamps floating above his head. Within the golden lamps, there seemed to be the shadows of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas flashing, emitting bursts of Sanskrit. This young monk was as handsome as Golden Cicada, but his skin was much paler. Under the illumination of the colored glass Buddhist light, he still appeared slightly gloomy. Although his appearance had changed greatly, and he had entered the Buddhist gate, how could Xiao Yin not recognize him? This young monk in the black kasaya was the king of the underworld's grand disciple, Shin Tu-Zhe, whom he had met once in the past. Shi Tianhao had also seen the true appearance of the king of the underworld's Gongzi through the images of light and shadow that Xiao Yin had provided. Now that he had seen him in person, he recognized him at a glance. This person had vanished without a trace for many years, yet he had silently entered the Buddhist sect. It was slightly surprising, but it was also reasonable. The king of the underworld naturally recognized Shin Tu-Zhe as well, but he ignored him. His attention was focused on Xiao Yan, who was opposite him. Shin Tu-Zhe, dressed like a monk, was also looking at Xiao Yan. Both of them were currently pouring their dharmic powers into the huge red halo beneath their feet, seeping into the red pillar of light in the center of the halo. Xiao Yan similarly communicated his divine sense dharmic powers with Heavenly Bane. Among those present, his connection with Heavenly Bane was the deepest, but even he could not freely control Heavenly Bane and the power of the entire Nether Sea. The others were stirring the Nether Sea, forming a joint effort to interfere with Xiao Yan as much as possible. The Nether Sea tide, which had been kept out by the red halo, was now surging even more violently. Although everyone was standing on the halo and could see each other, they were still in different spaces that could not be directly touched. Only when the Nether Sea realms and inner realms completely merged, and the barrier disappeared, would they be able to truly touch each other. And that moment was about to come. Chapter 14:13. The rings of light gradually condensed, and as the Nether Sea realms and inner realms melted and merged, the waves of calamities and tribulations in the Nether Sea grew more and more violent. Even Xiao Yin was severely affected at this moment, and could no longer control the Nether Sea as he wished. The Nether Sea was violent and chaotic to begin with, and it was becoming more and more chaotic. This was the best course of action. Refining and controlling the Nether Sea was essentially a heaven-defying act, and had to be planned step by step, before truly and completely controlling this world. The difficulty of stabilizing the Nether Sea was far greater than causing it to go berserk. However, Xiao Yin had the deepest connection with heaven's misfortune. He had lived in the Nether Sea for so many years, refining it over the years. Even if the Nether Sea went berserk, he could still direct and control a considerable portion of the Nether Sea world's power. The king of the underworld, Shin Tu-Zhe, and Wu Mingqi could not compare to him. The tides of the Nether Sea grew more turbulent, and the realm passage Shi Tianhao traversed also became increasingly fragile. He needed to be more careful and quickly approach heaven's misfortune. Step onto the red ring of light where everyone was, and meet up with Xiao Yan. As Shi Tianhao approached, the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada both sensed him. Their gazes flickered slightly, and they looked in Shi Tianhao's direction. After taking a closer look at Golden Cicada, Shi Tianhao frowned slightly. He vaguely felt that the aura around Golden Cicada seemed to have become even more mysterious than he remembered. That tranquil, natural, and enlightened feeling was becoming more and more complete. It even showed a profoundness that was not here, not on the other side, and not in the middle of the flow. It was a sight to behold. After the future glazed star Buddha Lord was born, he has benefited greatly from spreading the Dharma. Shi Tianhao thought to himself. When the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada saw Shi Tianhao, they both understood. The great sage and the others have been defeated, and the Yuan Dragon King must have been defeated as well. It seems like the situation in the Divine Land has been settled. In the end, the demons were defeated. Otherwise, this kid would not have come to the Netherworld Sea. It was Golden Cicada who was in contact with Great Saint Zhuyan and the Great Sage. Golden Cicada knew the general outcome even without Great Saint Zhuyan and the others telling him. It was just that it was not easy to deduce the specific process of the outcome. Above his head, there was a flash of light, as if a giant cicada had appeared, floating in the void. The giant cicada flapped its wings, and strands of karma threads interweaved above it, floating in the Netherworld Sea. Golden Cicada's eyes flashed. A demon in the Dharma-ending realm has fallen. Who is it? It looks like the Dragon Clan. It shouldn't be made by the heaven-punishing ominous sword. In the Netherworld Sea, thousands of natural disasters and earthly tribulations not only destroyed the tangible, but also disrupted the flow of the great path in the world like a real doomsday. The power of the cultivators in the Dharma-ending realm was mysterious. Even if they had fallen, it was difficult for people to speculate about the mysteries of heaven. Even with Golden Cicada's exquisite dharma and proficiency in the way of karma, he could only obtain very vague information when he deduced at this moment. But this little bit of information was enough for him to make some general judgments. The power that Xianmen Tianzong had left in the Divine Land should be overestimated as much as possible. For a great demon in the Dharma-ending realm, being repelled and being killed were two completely different things. The difference in difficulty was self-evident. Beside him, Shintazhe also saw Shi Tianhao at this moment. His eyes flashed slightly, but his expression did not change. That was not the opponent he needed to worry about. His opponent was the heroic man who had manifested the Dharma form of the Void Return, which was 90 feet tall, and looked like a flame god. Moreover, the so-called opponent was not an actual battle. That was something that Golden Cicada considered. Shintazhe's battlefield was only the fight for control of the Netherworld Sea. Or rather, he was trying his best to interfere with Xiao Yan's control of the Netherworld Sea. Once upon a time, in Shintazhe's opinion, Xiao Yan was an opponent at the same level as him, and only in terms of power. In other aspects, in Shintazhe's opinion, people like Xiao Yan, who had clear likes and dislikes, whose emotional inclinations would clearly determine their behavior, and whose actions were easily guided, were not difficult to deal with. Most of the time, he did not need to deal with them personally. Instead, they could become a sharp blade in his hand, helping him deal with other opponents. In fact, it was because of Xiao Yan that he had been able to successfully plot against Daoist Yu Ming, kill him, and seize his control of the Netherworld Sea. If not for the King of the Underworld's means, Daoist Yu Ming would have really fallen long ago. After that, in order to avoid the wrath of the King of the Underworld and the encirclement and suppression of Xianmen Tianzong and the Taishu Temple, Shintazhe had gone into hiding, imitating his grandmaster, and patiently and silently waited for the opportunity. He had also endured for many years, and had enough patience to continue waiting. After the revival of Buddhism, he had decisively converted to Buddhism, seeking protection. With Buddhism concealed by him, it was extremely difficult for Xianmen Tianzong, the Taishu Temple, and the King of the Underworld to find him. Whether it was Buddhism or the Taoist techniques of the King of the Underworld, they all had the characteristic of being inclusive. This allowed Shintazhe to quickly make great progress in cultivating Buddhism. However, what made him a little dumbfounded was that the strength of the entire Xianmen Tianzong, including Xiao Yan, had shown an explosive growth trend. Even with Shintazhe's gloomy mind, he was momentarily shocked. Whether it was one's own strength or the strength that could be mobilized, When the gap between the two sides was large to a certain extent, overcoming 1,000 caddies with little effort would become empty talk. To use others as a knife, one must at least have enough strength to wield the knife. Therefore, Shintazé had never dared to underestimate Xiao Yan's master, who was already famous before the war between the two worlds. However, he did not expect that in such a short period of time, Xiao Yan had also reached a height that he had to look up to. The four heroes of the celestial sect of wonders had successively refined their spirits to return to the void. After Xiao Yan returned to the void, he had always lived in the netherworld sea and rarely made a move. It was difficult for the outside world to judge his strength, but it was not difficult to imagine the strength of the other three people who were equally famous. As for the master of the celestial sect of wonders, there was naturally not much to say. At this moment, Shintazé looked at Xiao Yan, who was opposite him, and was momentarily speechless. However, he still calmed his mind and continued with the work at hand. At this moment, for Shintazé, it was also the best opportunity to compete with Xiao Yan and restrain Xiao Yan's refinement of the netherworld sea. Not only him, even the king of the underworld had come. For the king of the underworld at this moment, dealing with the traitor Shintazé was not the most important matter. First, he had to deal with Xiao Yan. The heaven-punishing sword was unable to enter the netherworld sea. The master of the celestial sect of wonders himself, and the experts under him had entered the spiritual sea. The emptiness of Xianmen Tianzong and the divine land was just right for him to do. More importantly, if this dragged on, Xiao Yan would refine the netherworld sea deeper and deeper. For them, it would be difficult to reverse the situation. However, Shintazé was also slightly shocked that the king of the underworld could come in. Shintazé was not surprised that the king of the underworld could recover his strength so quickly after going into hibernation. Although the ritual had been destroyed twice because of Lin Feng in the netherworld sea and Yan Nanlai in the process of seizing the Haotian mirror, causing the king of the underworld to waste a lot of precious resources, the king of the underworld still had enough savings to set it up a third time. What surprised Shintazé was that the king of the underworld could actually still participate in the fight for the netherworld sea. As far as he knew, during the process of fighting with Lin Feng and the rest in the heaven calamity chaotic space before the war between the two worlds, the king of the underworld not only had his ritual for recovering his strength for the first time been destroyed, but he had also lost his control over the netherworld sea. Although Taoist Yu Ming had survived because of the king of the underworld, his control over the netherworld sea had inevitably fallen into Shintazé's hands. However, from the looks of it now, the king of the underworld seemed to still have some hidden tricks up his sleeve. Although it looked rather weak, it was still able to guide the king of the underworld into the netherworld sea and interfere with Xiao Yan. This made Shintazé feel doubtful. The same question actually existed in the hearts of Xiao Yan, Shi Tianhao, Wu Mingqi, and the rest. However, they did not voice it out as well. Everyone's eyes were on the red light pillar that was surrounded by the halos. At this moment, Wu Mingqi had already retracted his gaze from Yan Xinghe. He sorted out his emotions and looked at the light pillar formed by the power of heavenly calamity. Although he was also a proud person, Wu Mingqi knew that among the four people in the netherworld sea, his strength was the weakest. However, his opponents did not know, but Wu Mingqi himself knew that he had almost no backup. Under such circumstances, it was inevitable that he would be alone if he wanted to interfere in the upcoming battle. If he could maintain his current control over the netherworld sea, it could already be considered a success. Although Wu Mingqi disliked Xianmen Tianzong, to Wu Mingqi and the Taishu temple behind him, the king of the underworld was undoubtedly more hated, and the Buddhists were not completely unrelated to him. At this moment, the king of the underworld and Shintazé were both activating their spiritual power and consciousness in an attempt to interfere with Xiao Yan's actions and disrupt Xiao Yan's control over the netherworld sea. This was equivalent to suppressing Xiao Yan's strength. If they could completely cut off Xiao Yan's connection with heavenly calamity and the netherworld sea, this battle would be much easier for them. For the past decade or so, Wu Mingqi had been doing the same thing. It was just that at this moment he chose to watch from the sidelines. He did not continue to disrupt Xiao Yan, but he also did not help Xiao Yan suppress the king of the underworld and Shintazé. Silently, he stood on the halo as if he had nothing to do with it, merely watching from the sidelines. Shi Tianhao came to the side of Xiao Yan's return to void physique. The nine-zhang tall flame giant turned its head and nodded slightly at Shi Tianhao. At this moment, the many realms of the netherworld sea finally fused completely, forming a ring-like domain space. The spatial obstruction in front of everyone also disappeared at this moment. They did not need to attempt to break through the netherworld sea domain in order to attack their opponents. Let's go. Although there were only the two of them and there were so many opponents before them, Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao both laughed loudly. Instead, they took the initiative to attack their opponents. Xiao Yan's return to void physique suddenly stood up from the flaming lotus. The lotus beneath his feet dispersed and transformed into a boundless sea of flames. As his arms trembled, layers of netherworld sea calamities and tribulations surged toward him, causing his body to become even taller. In particular, the dark evil flame and the mysterious heavenly tribulation flame seemed to be endless in this land of the netherworld sea's source. The flames were truly monstrous. Beside him, Shi Tianhao also split his abundant essence physique and rage god physique. Above his head, the sky city and the blue sky all heavens formation unfolded. Under the blue sky, above the majestic city, an invisible wheel of light slowly rose, as if the heavens were rotating together. Chapter 14:14. Xiao Yan manifested his return to void conjured physique, and his entire body was wreathed in flames. The bluish-purple dark evil flame, and the black mysterious heavenly tribulation flame surged endlessly from the dark sea and gathered toward Xiao Yan. The two extremely terrifying demonic flames formed a pair of huge wings on Xiao Yan's back, one blue and one black. The size of this pair of wings could no longer be described as covering the sky. When the wings extended out, it was as if they covered the entire dark sea world, turning the entire world into this pair of flaming wings. Activating the power of these two types of true flames to the extreme, it made Xiao Yan look even more ferocious and domineering. His entire body was shrouded in bluish-black, making it hard for others to see his appearance clearly. He was like a flaming god from the nine hells. Seeing this, everyone's eyes narrowed slightly. The king of the underworld and Shintazhe both shook their heads in their hearts. Although we've tried our best to interfere, his pace of refining the dark sea is still ahead in all aspects. He can already separate and extract the different powers of calamity from the dark sea at will. Although they had such thoughts in their hearts, the emotions of the king of the underworld and the others did not change at all. The king of the underworld formed hand seals with both hands and pointed in the direction of heavenly tribulation, continuing to use his divine sense to permeate the dark sea. His gaze turned toward Yan Xinghe, who had an indifferent and calm expression on his face. At this moment he took a step forward. With this step, the heaven and earth within the dark sea seemed to tremble slightly, and time and space were separated. On one side, it was Xiao Yan's flaming wings that swept across the world. On the other side, although the world was still shaking and filled with calamities, the all-encompassing flames had receded, and the dark sea had returned to its original state. As the golden light and white clouds floated, an independent holy kingdom appeared in the dark sea. It was like a peaceful paradise during the end of days. It was extremely eye-catching, and the chanting of deities and Buddhas could be heard incessantly. Seeing that Yan Xinghe had activated the 8th stage of the famous Taishu Nine Heavens technique, Shen Tian Miraculous Immortal Realm, Xiao Yan was surprised. Why, after being refined into an evil soul, you can no longer use the heavenly void mystic light? Although he was slightly astonished, Xiao Yan did not have the slightest intention of holding back. The netherworld evil light transformed into a bluish-purple wing. With a wave, it struck towards Yan Xinghe with the power to destroy heaven and earth. That ferocious aura caused the blood river True Water, 9 underworld cold wind and other calamities to temporarily retreat. Although Yan Xinghe was unable to use the heavenly void mystic light, and had been refined into an evil soul, his cultivation and dermic powers were strong enough to let others see the might of a top figure of the divine land in the past. Shen Tianmiao's immortal domain unfolded. Within the range of this immortal domain, everything seemed to be under the control of Goose Star River. However, at this moment, Xiaoyan had attracted a large amount of netherworld evil flame from the netherworld sea. It was fierce and tyrannical, and it was beyond imagination. Among the 7 great true fires, the Nether Evil Emperor was the existence with the strongest pure destructive power. Under the sweeping purplish-blue demonic flames, space collapsed, time stopped, spiritual energy was obliterated, and physical objects were destroyed. The terrifying destructive power seemed endless, and it was hard to resist. As Yan Xinghe's hands changed, Shen Tianmiao's immortal domain kept changing, avoiding the strong and attacking the weak. Without the king of the underworld's intentional manipulation, Yan Xinghe naturally did not care about his safety. Instead, he used a more suitable tactic to deal with Xiaoyan. As he displayed Shen Tianmiao's immortal domain, he also used the boundless transformation technique, causing his entire being to be like Shen Tianmiao's immortal domain. It was as if his body was in the void, and he did not belong to this world. However, the Nether Evil Emperor was too tyrannical. Wherever the flames touched, it burned through the void and erased reality. Not only did it destroy real objects, but even illusory images were also surrounded by the raging flames. The situation was worrying. However, Yan Xinghe's expression did not change, and he was still as calm as before. As he dealt with Xiaoyan's Nether Evil Emperor attack, he flicked his finger, and rays of golden light shot into the sky. These golden lights danced in the void and turned into colorless treasure lights. The radiance was like falling rain, raining down on Xiaoyan's head. Xiaoyan's body stood there without moving. The black wings formed by the mysterious heaven tribulation flame on the other side were retracted at this time, blocking his head. When those colorless treasure lights landed on the surface of the wings formed by the black flames, they were like drops of water falling from the sky, instantly disappearing, evaporating without a trace. The black wings that covered the sky above Xiaoyan's head were like a black sea of fire, devouring anything that entered it. And after devouring Yan Xinghe's attack, Xiaoyan's wings formed by the mysterious heaven tribulation flame became even more powerful, and its aura was terrifying. When Yan Xinghe saw this, he changed his hand seals again. Then a magnificent white pillar of light appeared in the netherworld sea, piercing through the sky like a pillar that supported the heavens. It was the supreme demon suppression shield, like a brilliant pillar that suppressed all evil. Wherever the pillar of light passed, even the restless netherworld sea calmed down a little. Ever since Xiaoyan started cultivating, he had come into contact with many cultivators from the Taishu Temple, and he had seen the supreme demon suppression shield many times. But what he saw today was definitely the most powerful supreme demon suppression shield that Xiaoyan had ever seen. In the hands of Yan Xinghe, this Dharma spell mystique gave birth to the essence of returning to its original state, which was different from other Taishu cultivators. When used in the special environment of the netherworld sea, it was not weaker than the 9 heavens of Taishu Temple, and it was even more suitable. Xiaoyan looked at it, and saw that there were patterns on the white pillar of light, as though they were engravings. The pillar that supported the heavens became more and more condensed, as though it was gradually transforming from a pillar of light into a physical body. Just by observing with the naked eye, the scale of this white pillar of light was not inferior to the red pillar of light manifested by the power of heavenly calamity. Under Xiaoyan's control, the vicious dark heaven calamity flame suddenly grew from his black wings, and a green dragon suddenly appeared. It was the dark heaven calamity flame that burned like black smoke. The dark heaven calamity flame dragon coiled around the white pillar of light, and tightened its body. The white pillar of light trembled slightly, and streaks of white light were extracted from it. Meanwhile, the demonic flames around the dark heaven calamity flame dragon grew stronger and stronger. However, the golden inscriptions on the surface of the white pillar of light flickered, supporting the pillar of light formed by the supreme demon suppression shield. 2 flaming wings covered the sky, and more dark evil flame and dark heaven calamity flame gathered around Xiaoyan's return to void dharma body, causing his body to grow taller and taller. He walked toward Yan Xinghe, the king of the underworld, Golden Cicada, Shen Tuzhe, and the others. With every step he took, his body seemed to grow taller and taller under the illumination of the flames. In the end, the huge flaming wings disappeared, and in their place was a giant over 10 million feet tall. Its entire body was a bluish-purple color, and it was covered by a layer of armor that was condensed from black flames. The giant's facial features were also covered by a black mask, revealing only a pair of eyes. The giant's eyes were milky white, and they were also formed from pulsating flames. These were pure young true flames. However, the pure young true flames were not released, and they only existed in the giant's pupils. The flaming giant walked slowly through the ring of light, and arrived before Yan Xinghe. Then it pressed its palm down toward Yan Xinghe. The void domain formed by Shen Tianmiao's celestial realm above Yan Xinghe's head was shaking nonstop at this moment. Yan Xinghe used the clear void flow escape technique, sweeping the entire Shen Tianmiao's celestial realm to move. At the same time, he used the exalted devil suppression charm, blocking Xiao Yan's palm that drew upon the power of the netherworld sea to transform into a giant. In the next instant, the Shen Tianmiao's immortal realm lit up. Instead of retreating, Yan Xinghe advanced, seizing the opportunity to attack Xiao Yan. Golden light flashed, and white clouds swirled around the realm. In the blink of an eye, it was as small as a speck of dust a moment ago, but in the next instant, it was even taller than the giant that Xiao Yan had transformed into. However, the giant that Xiao Yan had transformed into suddenly disappeared. It turned out that Xiao Yan had shrunk his body. Not only was he no longer as gigantic as before, but he had also retracted his 90-foot-tall return-to-void-conjured physique, and returned to his original size. However, the power of his return-to-void-conjured physique was now fully bolstered by his physical body. Thanks to Shi Tianhao's divine stone of 2 phases, Xiao Yan could also freely switch between his physical body and primordial spirit form. After reaching the return-to-void-conjured physique, although he couldn't separate the Yin Yuan desolation god like Shi Tianhao could, he could still manifest his return-to-void-conjured physique and unleash spell techniques to the fullest. He could also fuse the power of his return-to-void-conjured physique into his physical body like other martial cultivators, making it even more powerful. At this moment, Xiao Yan's entire body was surging with blood. Not only was his return-to-void-conjured physique fused with the power of the Dark Sea, making him unprecedentedly powerful, he exhaled and threw a punch toward the oncoming Shen Tian's immortal realm. He wanted to shatter the Holy Kingdom before him with a single point. Yan Xinghe looked at Xiao Yan with ripples in his eyes. He had also been through hundreds of battles when he was alive, but the power displayed by Xiao Yan still shocked him. Even with the addition of a portion of the power of the Dark Sea, his power was still astonishing. In order to withstand such violent and ferocious power of the Dark Sea and make it his own, a cultivator's cultivation base had to reach a certain level. Regardless of whether it was what the king of the underworld had told him, or what Yan Xinghe had observed for himself, this valiant young man before him was clearly only a return-to-void stage cultivator. However, his magical powers were shockingly powerful. Xiao Yan's aura was majestic. The terrifying fist that could destroy heaven and earth directly broke Yan Xinghe's Shen Tian Miao Yu immortal realm in the netherworld sea, revealing a gap. Meanwhile, this gap was rapidly expanding, and pitch-black spatial rifts were extending around the gap. The realm of golden light shattered, and 1,000 miles of dike was destroyed by an ant's nest. A small gap would immediately trigger the Dark Sea to search for it, and then expand the gap even further. While urging Yan Xinghe to fight Xiao Yan, the king of the underworld was also doing his best to strengthen his infiltration of heaven's misfortune. At the same time, he was disrupting Xiao Yan's previous achievements and suppressing the power of the Dark Sea to aid and improve Xiao Yan. Seeing that Xiao Yan intended to fight Yan Xinghe in close combat, the king of the underworld tapped a finger in the air, and streaks of black light surrounded the Shen Tian's immortal realm. As he formed hand seals with one hand, he was still trying his best to communicate with heaven's misfortune. The fingers of his other hand moved, and the black light transformed into a gray, mist-like chaotic aura of death, which filled up the gap in Shen Tian's immortal realm. Then it rapidly enveloped Shen Tian's immortal realm. From the outside it looked like a giant oval egg. This was the powerful protective magical power that the king of the underworld had created based on the power of the Dark Sea realm. The Dark Sea realm protection. The king of the underworld's orthodoxy required at least 3 people to work together to unleash this powerful magical power. However, in the hands of the king of the underworld, It was effortless. He set up another layer of defense for Yan Xinghe, blocking Xiao Yan's path. Chapter 14-15. Seeing the king of the underworld use the dark sea barrier, Xiao Yan smiled nonchalantly. This method was the magic that the underworld emperor had created by imitating the power of the realm of the underworld sea. Even though the realm of the underworld sea was unstable and cracked at times, it could contain thousands of catastrophes without leaking into the boundless world. The defensive power of the realm of the underworld sea was self-evident. The realm protector of the underworld sea, derived from the will power, was also an excellent defensive magic. In terms of pure defensive power, it was one of the best in the entire history of the human cultivation world in the Divine Land. It's just that one reason is that Xiao Yan's comprehension of refining the Nether Sea is even deeper than the Emperor of the Underworld. 2. Because of the group of disciples of the Emperor of the Underworld who were captured, the Xian Gate Sky Sect also has a detailed method of protecting the Nether Sea. Although it was the same mystique that was used by Su Anda and the rest, the essence of the mystique could not be compared to that of the King of the Underworld. However, Xiao Yan had a deep understanding of this mystique. He raised his palm like a blade and chopped down on the dark sea barrier that was formed from the chaotic deathly aura. As Xiao Yan's palm chopped down, his spiritual power surged. He did not hold back, but all sorts of terrifying powers gathered in the world. The Blood River True Water and the Yellow Springs True Water flowed. The Infinite Astral Baleful Water, the 9 Underworld Een Wind blew. The Nether Evil Flame and the mysterious Heavenly Tribulation Flame burned. Endless calamities and tribulations mixed together, forming a rotating force that crushed towards the Dark Sea barrier. Even the true Dark Sea realm would occasionally break, causing calamities and tribulations to leak out and poison the world. Although the King of the Underworld's Dark Sea barrier was strong, when Xiao Yan used the power of the Dark Sea to attack it, it shook violently. It was like a sand sculpture on the shore being hit by a huge wave, and it immediately started to collapse. Seeing this scene, the King of the Underworld seemed to be mentally prepared. His expression did not change at all. His original intention was to buy some time for Yan Xinghe. While the Dark Sea Protector was helping to defend, Yan Xinghe's entire body surged with magic power. Shen Tianmiao's immortal realm quickly repaired the hole that Xiao Yan had created. His body began to flicker with a mysterious and unfathomable radiance. It wasn't bright, it wasn't dazzling. It was hard to describe, hard to fathom, and hard to touch. It was the last technique of the 9 heavens of Taishu scripture, Heavenly Taishu Mystic Light. However, the Great Void Mystic Light around Yan Xinghe was different from before. There was a dazzling mark on the mystical radiance that enveloped Yan Xinghe. These traces were also formed by light, but they were much more dazzling than the Great Void Mystic Light that filled the sky. However, this dazzling light wasn't as strong as the Great Void Mystic Light. Instead, it seemed to be strong on the outside but weak on the inside. It had lost its mysterious and unfathomable profoundness. Because of the existence of this scar-like light, the Great Void Mystic Light around Yan Xinghe's body seemed to be inferior. It could be described, and it even seemed to have a concrete shape and appearance. Although the quality of the universal Great Void Mystic Light was outstanding, and Yan Xinghe was one of the few Great Void stage experts that Xiao Yan had personally come into contact with, the universal Great Void Mystic Light that he was using now still gave off a feeling of difficulty. Xiao Yan's gaze fell on the mark, and a look of realization appeared on his face. This feeling is the result of being injured by Master and Aunt Xuanli. No wonder. At this moment, his return to void physique had fused with his physical body, and he had also gathered the power of the Dark Sea to strengthen himself. His power had become extremely violent. In a flash, he directly rushed into the hole in the Shen Tianmiao's immortal realm that had yet to close. Once he entered the Shen Tianmiao's immortal realm, Xiao Yan instantly felt his body become heavy, and the circulation of his magic power became sluggish. The spiritual qi and the various laws of this place were repelling him. This was a world created by Yan Xinghe's magic power, and it even isolated the invasion of the power of the Dark Sea from the outside world to a certain extent. After entering this place, the laws of heaven and earth were naturally under Yan Xinghe's control. However, Xiao Yan didn't care. He took large strides forward, and with each step, the Shun Tianmiao's immortal realm shook. Cracks appeared on the immortal Buddha kingdom that was like a glorious paradise. Xiaoyan used brute force to break through the tricks, and more power of the dark sea surged in. This caused the glorious Shun Tianmiao's immortal realm to wither, as if it was facing a catastrophe. The golden light gradually dimmed, and the essence of the celestial music became muffled. The white clouds constantly dissipated, and countless great Tao runes were constantly being worn down. In Xiaoyan's eyes, there was a dark red light that was no different from the heavenly calamity. As he took a step forward, he had already arrived in front of Yan Xinghe. His left hand swept up the raging black heaven tribulation flame, and he clawed at his opponent, forming a terrifying suction force that was even more terrifying than a black hole. It locked his opponent in place, making it impossible for him to dodge. His right hand clenched into a fist, and he punched at his opponent. Yan Xinghe's eyes narrowed. He saw that in Xiaoyan's punch, there seemed to be many streams of great Tao light that converged at a single point. On that point, there was a light that constantly changed between bright and dark, alternating and rotating, like a flickering spark in the darkness. However, that spark that seemed like it could be extinguished at any time, that tiny bit of light, contained a terrifying and primal power. There was a hint of the great Tao of heaven and earth being reborn after being destroyed, and then being destroyed again. The cycle repeated endlessly. When Xiaoyan's yin and yang Guyuan hammer smashed down, it immediately caused the layers of Tao laws in Shun Tianmiao's wonderland to collapse. The Tao of rebirth after destruction was no longer something that Yan Xinghe could freely control. Although he maintained Shun Tianmiao's wonderland, and continued to evolve the spatial world, these newly born Tao laws quickly collapsed. Being sucked in by Xiaoyan's boundless black heaven tribulation flame, Yan Xinghe felt that he could not use the clear sky circulation, or the ascending heaven technique to dodge. The black heaven tribulation flame's terrifying power that could devour everything was fully unleashed at this moment. Under Xiaoyan's control, the black smoke-like flame took the initiative to attack, absorbing everything around it. The suction force formed made it hard for Yan Xinghe to evade, forcing him to take on his yin and yang Guyuan hammer head-on. If it was just Xiaoyan's black heaven tribulation flame, it would have been fine. With Yan Xinghe's strength he would not have been sucked in. However, at this moment, Xiaoyan was gathering the endless black flames in the Netherworld Sea. Yan Xinghe was in the Netherworld Sea, and he could feel the terrifying power affecting the space and time around him, making it hard for him to escape. Yan Xinghe extended both his hands forward. On his left and right index fingers, there was a ball of light rapidly condensing. One was half black and half white, and the other was high and ethereal. The two balls of light rapidly combined into one, and the great void mystic light around Yan Xinghe's body also condensed towards the ball of light on his fingertip. The ball of light constantly shrank and condensed. Finally, it condensed together with the great void mystic light on his fingertip, becoming more and more mysterious. That glaring scar seemed to have disappeared for a moment. He extended his finger and pointed it towards Xiaoyan's yin and yang Guyuan hammer, at the spot of starfire that manifested the Tao of life and death. At the point of contact, the space and time suddenly darkened and became distorted. In the next moment, Shun Tian's wonderland completely shattered. And where Xiaoyan and Yan Xinghe's powers intersected, that flickering light, like a spark in the ashes, and that unfathomable, indescribable light, at this moment, exploded together, becoming incomparably bright. The brilliance was oppressive. For a moment, this dazzling radiance even lit up the dark, oppressive, and chaotic Netherworld Sea. It caused this apocalyptic world that was filled with destructive power to have a moment of brightness and warmth. Within the boundless light, Yan Xinghe's low groan could be heard. Streams of light flickered around his body, protecting his body as he retreated. Xiaoyan's forward momentum was also interrupted, and he stopped at his original spot. The mysterious heaven tribulation flame around his body surged, absorbing the aftermath of the battle between the two sides. His entire body was wrapped in black flames, and he looked like a demon god that had descended to the world. Yan Xinghe's expression was wooden, without the slightest expression. Black and white light flickered around his body, and his originally weakened spiritual power became abundant again. However, the great void mystic light that filled the sky was no longer visible. On top of the king of the underworld's head, a life and death underworld Tao fruit silently floated in the void, and the black and white light flickered on it. He glanced at Xiao Yin and frowned slightly. His finger tapped lightly, and dark streams of light fluctuated continuously. Within the light streams, an ancient book appeared. As the pages of the book flipped, it seemed like layers upon layers of the world of the dead were manifested, and it even contained the profoundness of the cycle of life and death. The powerful fluctuations of the creation treasure spread out, shaking the void. It was the book of life and death that the king of the underworld controlled. The king of the underworld raised his palm, and the book of life and death flew into midair. The light and shadow of a majestic world instantly appeared. That world was different from Yan Xinghe's Shen Tianmiao's fairyland, but it was not dark and terrifying. It was just lifeless, and it was gray, making one unable to see any signs of life. It was not that there was no sign of life in that world, but wherever the gray shrouded, everything seemed to have come to a stop and stop. Everything in the world became a colorless gray, and all life lost its luster. It was a world that was completely different from the world that millions of living beings lived in. It was a world that belonged to the dead. Xiao Yin looked at the book of life and death without fear, and he laughed instead. King of the underworld, I thank you on behalf of my old Mount Tai. Thank you for your book of life and death. The ancient dynasty's creation treasure, the longevity lotus seat, was because Gu Jun had obtained a few pages of the king of the underworld's book of life and death during the war between the two worlds, which allowed him to take the last step and achieve creation. The king of the underworld said indifferently, "Do you think that it's so easy to take advantage of me? There's still a long way to go. It's the same for Gu Jun, and it's the same for you." As he said that, the king of the underworld pressed his palm down, and the world of the dead formed by the book of life and death pressed down on Xiao Yan's head. Under his command, Yan Xinghe also took the initiative to attack again. The king of the underworld himself continued to change his hand seals, and he tapped a few times at the red pillar of light that heavenly calamity had manifested in the distance. The netherworld sea was becoming increasingly chaotic, and the red pillar of light formed by heavenly calamity was constantly shaking. Countless calamities and tribulations were born and destroyed. On the other side, Shen Tuzhe did not hold back either. He did the same thing as the king of the underworld, constantly shaking the netherworld sea, interfering with Xiao Yan, and suppressing Xiao Yan's advantage and battle strength. At this moment, Golden Cicada was also fighting Shi Tianhao. Chapter 14-16. Shi Tianhao's Inyuan body and the body of the Rage God manifested separately. The 12 heavenly generals' spiritual bodies flew out from the top of his body of the Rage God's head and transformed into the original form of the azure sky, all heavens array. In the center of the blue sky formed by the azure sky all heavens array, a majestic immortal city stood high above the 9 heavens. It was the city in the sky. On top of the city in the sky, there was an invisible wheel of light. As it rotated, it seemed to pull all the heavens and realms together. Shi Tianhao lifted the great celestial wheel. With the support of the city in the sky and the azure sky all heavens array, he walked under the blue sky. His figure seemed to be everywhere and instantly appeared in front of Golden Cicada. Golden Cicada put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice. The giant black cicada above his head transformed into a Buddha. After the Buddha appeared, a number of flowers fell from the sky. Layers of Buddha light shone in all directions, forming a world of its own. The Buddha light separated itself from the blue sky formed by the azure sky all heavens array, like two different worlds. Shi Tianhao's figure appeared at the edge of the blue sky, outside the Buddhist nation. The Buddhist nation and the blue sky were two different worlds. In the blue sky, he seemed to be everywhere and everywhere. He didn't even need to use his mind to be there. Because he had existed for a long time, he appeared with a thought and could go anywhere. But entering the Buddhist nation was another matter. Shi Tianhao couldn't do as he pleased as he could in the azure sky all heavens array. Shi Tianhao looked at the boundless pure land formed by the Buddha light, and raised his eyebrows slightly. The body of the rage god lifted the great celestial wheel and smashed it toward the pure land of Buddha light with unparalleled ferocity. The terrifying power, like the collapse of the heavens and the destruction of the universe, seemed to want to destroy the pure land that had survived thousands of tribulations. Golden Cicada's figure disappeared, leaving only the shadow of the Buddha in the void. A giant black cicada crouched beneath it. As the cicada's wings flapped, the sound of cicada chirping shook heaven and earth. But at this moment, the cicada's chirping was completely different from before. It was no longer mournful and shrill, but pure and perfect. The entire pure land of Buddha light centered on Golden Cicada. It was transparent inside and outside like glass, like mist and illusion, residing in the void. Shi Tianhao executed the great heavenly wheel and struck it out. For a moment, he felt that it was unreachable. The pure land of Buddha aura seemed to have frozen the changes of the Dharma and logos of the world, turning the short distance into the horizon. Unlike the great Saint Zhu Yan's manipulation of space, Golden Cicada's current technique was even more profound and mysterious. Even if Shi Tianhao wanted to make a breakthrough, for a moment, he felt like a tiger trying to bite the sky, with nowhere to bite. The chanting of sutras echoed in the void along with the chirping of cicadas, causing people to not feel irritated. Instead, their moods gradually eased and calmed down, but they also lost their fighting spirit. Shi Tianhao's eyes flickered. He looked up at the giant Buddha and giant cicada in the center of the pure land and said grumpily, "Well, Golden Cicada, are you bullying me because my attainment in the Tao of karma and fate is not as good as second senior brother and third senior brother?" The giant cicada did not move at all. The Buddha sat on the giant cicada and stretched out his finger to gently pinch the falling Sharo flower. A faint smile appeared on his face, and he did not say anything either. Shi Tianhao stared at the zenith heaven and the pure land and suddenly laughed, much more unbridled than Golden Cicada. "Golden Cicada, you are someone who has existed since ancient times. You should know that the devil Buddha is merciless, right?" As he spoke, his body of the desolate god took a step forward and disappeared into his body of surplus yuan. His body of surplus yuan, which was 100 feet tall, became even taller. Shi Tianhao looked at Golden Cicada. In the eyes of his body of surplus yuan, there was suddenly a brilliant brilliance flowing. The Tai Chi pattern on his forehead spun and disappeared without a trace. And on his forehead, right in the middle of his eyebrows, a pitch-black crack gradually appeared. In the Azure Heaven formation, the appearance of the Sky City also changed, turning into a shining pagoda. This pagoda did not seem to have any layers. It was a complete whole, and its shape was difficult to describe. But as it stood there, it suppressed the heavens and seemed to have the ability to suck in the stars and change the moon. Hidden within the exuberant vitality was the true meaning of chaos and primordial chaos, making the pagoda look extremely mysterious. It also seemed to exist between reality and illusion, changing unpredictably. The pagoda flew out and fused with Shi Tianhao's body of surplus yuan, falling into the heart of Shi Tianhao's body of Dharma physique. Boom, boom, boom. A low sound rang out. It did not ring in the ears of the people, but in the depths of their hearts. Not only Golden Cicada, but even the king of the underworld, Yan Xinghe, Shen Tizhe, and Wu Mingqi seemed to feel that low sound ringing in the depths of their hearts and souls. It was like the sound of a heartbeat. It was continuous, its rhythm fast and slow, making Golden Cicada and the others feel a wave of irritation in their hearts. Not to mention the king of the underworld, Yan Xinghe and Golden Cicada, even Shen Tizhe and Wu Mingqi had extremely firm minds and wills. They rarely felt this kind of restlessness. Even if it did appear, it would be instantly dispelled. If they had this feeling when they were concentrating on their cultivation, they would have to calm their hearts. Otherwise, it would be the birth of inner demons and a sign of qi deviation. But at this moment, even if they calmed their hearts and dispelled it, the irritation would be extinguished and reborn as the sound of the heartbeat continued. Everyone naturally knew that this was Shi Tianhao's doing. At this moment, Shi Tianhao held the great celestial wheel and stood under the blue sky. Thunder rumbled in the sky formed by the blue sky all heavens formation, intertwining with the heartbeat, as if amplifying it. The rotation of the great celestial wheel did not seem as violent as before, but it was even more solemn. The rhythm of its rotation was also in line with the heartbeat. Every time the heartbeat sounded, the great celestial wheel rotated once. The rhythm was constantly changing, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. With the support of the great celestial wheel and the blue sky all heavens formation, Shi Tianhao pushed his dharmic powers to the extreme. Golden Cicada's attainments in the Dharma were already extremely profound. But at this moment, under the influence of Shi Tianhao, the traces of the pure land of Buddha light gradually became tangible. It was no longer untouchable and unreachable. The blue sky domain formed by the blue sky all heavens formation began to gradually permeate the Buddha light. The pure land was compressed step by step, while the blue sky expanded step by step. Accompanying it was Shi Tianhao, who took a step forward again, striding toward Golden Cicada. The great Buddha on the back of the giant cicada looked serene and calm, the smile on his face undiminished. At this moment he simply stood up and stood on the back of the giant cicada. He formed a Dharma seal with both hands, and then pushed his palm toward Shi Tianhao. With this push, the light shadow of the great Buddha immediately solidified, as if a real Buddha had descended, no longer illusory. From all over the great Buddha's body, an aura of supremacy spread out. When he struck out, it seemed to envelop heaven and earth, engulfing the entire vast thousand worlds, and attacking Shi Tianhao together. The Mahavirokana Divine Palm Seal, the Great Thousand Seal. In the history of the Divine Land, it was the most famous martial arts magical power, dominating the present and controlling heaven and earth. Seeing this, Shi Tianhao revealed a look of interest. He laughed and said, "Come, come, come. Let's see who is the #1 martial artist in the Divine Land." After saying that, his abundant yuan body suddenly disappeared, and the body of the desolate god reappeared. The abundant yuan body was accommodated by the desolate god, and thunder divine patterns appeared on his body. As Shi Tianhao's figure suddenly expanded, he became even larger than the great Buddha. With a quick step, he unceremoniously struck the yin and yang Guyuan hammer. His yin and yang Guyuan hammer was different from Xiaoyan's deduction of the birth and death of the great Tao. Instead, it evolved the cycle of the great wilderness and the changes of creation. In terms of pure physical qi and blood power, it was above Xiaoyan. With a swing of the hammer, it collided with Golden Cicada's Mahavirokana palm Great Thousand Seals. The whole world shook. Where the two fists and palms met, a vacuum was formed. Shi Tianhao laughed and punched out one punch after another. As for the great Buddha body that Golden Cicada had manifested, he also activated the Mahavirokana palm fist seal to meet Shi Tianhao. Both sides fought until the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. In the end, Shi Tianhao also absorbed the Sky City and the Blue Sky All Heavens formation into his body. His entire body became indomitable, and the top of his head seemed to break through the void of the netherworld sea above. As for the great Buddha that Golden Cicada had transformed into, his figure also grew further. The giant black cicada light shadow under him also disappeared. The entire pure land of the Buddha nation had merged into his body, and he had also become incomparably huge. He attacked Shi Tianhao. Wu Mingqi looked at this scene and frowned slightly. Golden Cicada has now manifested his true form, but he can still manifest the body of a Buddha. He has completely merged the Buddhist Dharma with his demon body. To be able to do this, the birth of the future Buddha Lord has played a huge role. This Golden Cicada is probably not much inferior to the great sage in terms of physical qi and blood power. The strength of physical qi and blood has always been Golden Cicada's weakness. Shi Tianhao also felt the same, but he didn't care. He just pushed his physical martial arts to the extreme, and started a great battle with Golden Cicada. When the crowd saw his performance, they were undoubtedly even more shocked. Is this kid really only at the Void Return realm? Golden Cicada was also slightly impressed. He didn't say anything else. The great Buddha struck out with his palm, and as he fought Shi Tianhao, his other hand formed another Dharma seal. The next moment, a black ocean appeared in the void. It was silent. The appearance of this black ocean caused the netherworld sea to tremble slightly. The red pillar of light manifested by the power of heavenly calamity also shook slightly, as if it had been startled. Shi Tianhao's eyes lit up. He saw that the black ocean seemed to contain a power that could destroy and weaken all things. In the silence, it was soul-stirring. The silent and terrifying black ocean pressed down on Shi Tianhao, trying to drown him. At the same time, Golden Cicada formed fist seals with both hands and continued to attack. Shi Tianhao shouted. As the great celestial wheel rotated, it seemed to cause the myriad realms to collapse and collapse together. Then it turned into a rolling tide, crashing towards Golden Cicada. Vast and boundless powers collided with each other, causing a large number of disasters in the netherworld sea to shake together, turning the surroundings into a land of death. A dazzling light flashed between Shi Tianhao's brows, and the divine light of finality spewed out at this moment. It turned into a destructive rainbow, splitting the black ocean that was in a stalemate with the great celestial wheel in the middle. Chapter 14:17. The divine light of finality flashed between Shi Tianhao's eyebrows. Like a sharp blade, it cut open the black ocean that Golden Cicada had activated from the middle. However, the expression of the Buddha that Golden Cicada had transformed into did not change at all. Then the split black ocean closed up again, and continued to attack Shi Tianhao. Shi Tianhao raised his eyebrows slightly. His divine light of finality contained a wonderful power and intent, marking the end of all things. Wherever the divine light of creation passed, regardless of whether it was tangible or intangible, anything that was cut off would never be able to recover. Even though Golden Cicada's supernatural powers were powerful, his Buddhist dharma profound, and he had comprehended the true meaning of tranquility and nirvana, it was still unusual for the black ocean to recover so quickly after it was broken. The Buddha that he had transformed into stood above the black ocean. He put his palms together and pushed them towards Shi Tianhao. He had to deal with both the black ocean below and the Buddha's Vairocana palm above him. For a moment, Shi Tianhao felt that there was no way out. At this moment, a grand voice seemed to echo in Shi Tianhao's ears. The sea of bitterness is boundless. The sea of bitterness is boundless, and the nirvana realm is difficult to cross. Everyone talks about transcendence, but who can really achieve it? Sensing that Golden Cicada was suppressing his mind, Shi Tianhao sneered. As he calmed his mind, he carefully recalled the process of his divine light of finality coming into contact with the black ocean that Golden Cicada had created, trying to figure out the meaning contained in it. Shi Tianhao's eyes flickered slightly. Divine patterns of multicolored light once again appeared between his eyebrows. They turned into a dazzling brilliance in the void and shot towards the black ocean. In the blink of an eye, the black ocean was broken open again. The silent black ocean that was full of destructive power undulated, but this time, it was difficult for it to recover. The brilliance between Shi Tianhao's eyebrows flickered, forming a bridge in the void. Countless light shadows sat cross-legged on the bridge, and endless chanting of the great Tao could be heard from the light shadows. This was Shi Tianhao's other divine light of creation, the divine light of origin. When Golden Cicada saw Shi Tianhao's divine light of creation, he could not help but shake his head slightly. It was the first person in history to possess two beams of divine light of creation at the same time. However, the divine light of creation happened to neutralize his divine power, which he had used to simulate the tide of the Dead Sea. At this moment, Shi Tianhao had the support of Sky City, the blue falling all heavens formation, and the great celestial wheel, so the power of his origin divine light had also increased. However, Golden Cicada's expression was calm. Rays of perfect treasure light spread out from the Buddha body that he had manifested. It was as if he was in the center of the unmoving body, immortal and indestructible. Watching the battle between Shi Tianhao and Golden Cicada, the king of the underworld's eyes flickered slightly. Then he looked at Xiao Yan, who was as ferocious as the ruler of the Nether Sea. His expression turned slightly solemn. It was said that his divine power and dharmic powers were exquisite, that he could come back from the dead, and that he could return to the pinnacle of the vast 1,000 domains in less than 30 years. However, Xianmen Tianzong's development and growth shocked even him. Not to mention Lin Feng himself. Even the growth of his disciples had left everyone dumbfounded. The king of the underworld, who had seen countless times and experienced countless storms, was the same. The king of the underworld's eyes were pitch black, like the darkest abyss, devoid of any light. Yan Xinghe's evil soul and the Book of Life and Death were pressing down on Xiaoyan at this moment. However, Xiaoyan was surrounded by raging flames. He was fearless, and he drew upon the terrifying power of the Nether Sea to attack from every direction. Although he was held back by the king of the underworld and Shintaze, and his connection to the Nether Sea and Heaven's Bane was not as close as before, this was the Nether Sea realm after all. The one who benefited the most from this battle was still Xiaoyan, and it was far more than the others. The king of the underworld's gaze moved back and forth between Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao. Then, he suddenly stretched out both his hands, and as his hand seals changed, rays of gray light flew out from his body, and then fluctuated in the void, finally forming two huge black altars. Each altar was divided into 3 levels, showing the 3 symbols of heaven, earth, and man. They were perfectly integrated with the cycle of life and death, and the ruler of the nether world, forming a powerful aura that seemed to be unparalleled. This was the strongest magical art of the king of the underworld's orthodoxy, nether ritual. The king of the underworld stretched out both hands, and then closed his fingers together, clenching his palms together. As he clenched his fists, the 2 black nether ritual altars enveloped Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao respectively. Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao frowned at the same time. They wanted to react, but Golden Cicada and Yan Xinghe's evil soul were using their own methods, and they could not afford to be distracted for a moment. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao were both enveloped by the black altars. The 2 counterattacked forcefully, and endless flames and lightning struck the black altars. The black light on the altar flowed continuously, sealing Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao within. Yan Xinghe's evil soul and the Book of Life and Death jumped onto the altar together, and used the altar's powers to suppress Xiaoyan. Golden Cicada stood in front of the altar, and did not make any moves. He only observed Shi Tianhao's situation inside. His reaction was naturally within Golden Cicada's expectations. Although they had joined forces to deal with Xiaoyan and Xianmen Tianzong in the Netherworld Sea, it was only because they had a common goal. It did not mean that they were on good terms with each other. While they were attacking together, they were also on guard against each other. Shintaze did not attack directly, but instead focused on interfering with Xiaoyan's connection with Tianyi and the Netherworld Sea. The king of the underworld would not cause trouble for him now, but after seeing that Golden Cicada had gone all out, the king of the underworld finally took action personally. Golden Cicada also did not dare to casually ascend the altar formed by the king of the underworld's nether ritual. Before dealing with the threat of Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao, they naturally would not have any internal strife. But after that, it might not necessarily be the case. In the end, the problem still lay in the Netherworld Sea. And if they were no match for Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao and were forced to retreat, they would be the ones looking for an opportunity to take advantage of the other party. They would be a greater threat than the pursuit of Xiaoyan and the others. After all, once they left the Netherworld Sea, Shi Tianhao would be fine, but Xiaoyan's strength was destined to decline. But even so, Xiaoyan and his junior brother could feel the strangely overbearing power of the king of the underworld's magical powers. Shi Tianhao was still fine. The Sky City and the Blue Sky All Heavens Array were above his head, and the body of the Rage God had expanded to its limit. If not for the changes in the space inside the Black Altar, Shi Tianhao's rapidly expanding body would have burst it. He held up the great celestial wheel, and stared at the Black Altar like a tiger watching its prey. But Golden Cicada was guarding outside, waiting for him. Although he would not ascend the altar to join forces with Shi Tianhao, if Shi Tianhao broke out of the seal, he would immediately be intercepted by Golden Cicada. The man and the demon, who had been fighting fiercely just now, suddenly fell silent. They looked at each other across the Black Altar, and the atmosphere became somewhat oppressive. On the other side, Xiaoyan was having a hard time. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Inside the Black Altar formed by the Nether Ritual magical power, Xiaoyan felt that his connection with Tianyi and the Netherworld Sea had weakened further. This Black Altar was like an independent world, and it was even more complete than the Shen Tian immortal realm that Yan Xinghe had just unleashed. The inside and outside of the altar was a completely different world. The rules and dharma were completely different, and the power inside was even stronger. After Yan Xinghe and the Book of Life and Death entered the Black Altar, their power showed signs of increasing, and they were like fish in water. Under such circumstances, the pressure on Xiao Yan skyrocketed, and his expression became more solemn. But Xiao Yan's face showed no fear. Instead, he slapped the top of his head, and blazing flames surged out, instantly transforming into a 30-meter-tall giant sitting cross-legged on a flaming lotus platform. This flaming giant was Xiao Yan's return to void dharma body. After appearing, it immediately engulfed Xiao Yan's physical body. Its eyes opened, and the netherworld sea shook. The flame giant's body was covered in flames. The blue-purple netherworld evil flame, the black mysterious heaven tribulation flame, the milky white pure yang true fire, the needle-like golden sun true fire, the cyan Xitigarbha true fire, the red lotus karmic fire, and the golden-colored Nanmingli fire that flickered with red and blue radiance appeared together. But soon the other 5 true flames all disappeared, leaving only the ferocious dark evil flame, and the sinister mysterious heavenly tribulation flame. These 2 true flames grew more and more intense, and they stirred up the boundless flames in the netherworld sea. What caught the attention of the king of the underworld, Yan Xinghe, and the others was that the dark evil flame and mysterious heavenly tribulation flame seemed to have attracted the other vicious natural disasters in the netherworld sea to Xiao Yan, and they were all converging toward him. Even though the Black Altar had isolated the netherworld sea from the outside, the trembling of the netherworld sea seemed to have blurred the boundaries of this realm, and the power of the calamities began to circulate around Xiao Yan's body. The unbearably filthy blood river True Water transformed into a monstrous sea of blood that hung upside down above Xiao Yan's head. The Yellow Springs True Water that could purify all things transformed into a long river of the Yellow Springs, which surged and roared soundlessly as it revolved around Xiao Yan's body. Streaks of 9 Hell's Een winds, which were like black rays of light that could freeze all things, also revolved around Xiao Yan. The boundless baleful wind, which was in the form of a red mist of light, blew around relentlessly, and within the mist of light, one could vaguely see countless vengeful spirits and malicious ghosts struggling and howling together. Behind Xiao Yan's 90-foot-tall return to void stage Dharma body, a pair of boundless wings, one blue and one black, unfurled, and the dark evil flame and mysterious heavenly tribulation flame were both burning fiercely. The dark red light in his eyes almost materialized, and he made a strange seal with both hands before bringing them together in front of his chest. Slowly he pushed them forward. Everyone was situated in the realm of light, and the red pillar of light in the center of the realm became unprecedentedly dazzling at this moment. The myriad tribulations of the netherworld sea around Xiao Yan's body converged toward a single point in front of him. That pitch-black point flickered in and out of existence, displaying the power of creation and destruction. The tribulation of the netherworld sea was a terrifying power of calamity that brought about destruction. At this moment, it had evolved to the pinnacle of destruction, and even a doomsday world would come to an end as the great Tao would collapse. After destruction came rebirth, and this cycle continued to repeat as the power of the netherworld sea continued to increase. Following Xiao Yan's actions and the trembling of the heavenly tribulation, a vast amount of destructive power in the netherworld sea was drawn by Xiao Yan, and it converged toward a single point. With a single thought from Xiao Yan, this terrifying power exploded forth, directly shattering the black altar that was protecting him. Chapter 14:18. The Nether Evil Blaze, the mysterious heavenly tribulation flame, the blood river True Water, the 9 Nether Sinister Wind, the boundless astral baleful water, and the Yellow Springs True Water were the strongest and most ferocious forces in the netherworld sea. Apart from these 6 ferocious and evil forces, the netherworld sea also contained the dark extermination chi, the demonic dream charming stone, the ferocious Igos fire, the floating thunder water, and many other terrifying calamities. Any one of them would bring great destruction to the vast 1,000 domains. At this moment, it wasn't just the Nether Evil Blaze, the Yellow Springs True Water, and the other calamities. The myriad calamities of the netherworld sea were all gathering at the point in front of Xiao Yan. The terrifying destructive forces were all gathered at one point. Extermination was not the end, but the cycle of life and death was eternal. In this process, the power of extermination was endless. This was the mystique and dharma spell that Xiao Yan had cultivated in the Netherworld Sea for many years after he had refined his spirit to return to the void. He had used Xianmen Tianzong's heavenly virtue scripture as the foundation, and combined it with the myriad calamities of the Netherworld Sea, the Tao annihilation floating life. In the Netherworld Sea, the power of the Netherworld Sea was much stronger than in the vast thousand domains. The king of the underworld and Yan Xinghe had the deepest understanding of this. The black altar that enveloped Xiao Yan was shattered by the terrifying power of the Tao annihilation floating life. Even the netherworld ritual that the king of the underworld had personally set up could not withstand the attack of Xiao Yan, which had drawn on the power of the Netherworld Sea. Yan Xinghe and the Book of Life and Death, who were also in the black altar, had to face the baptism of that terrifying power. When the king of the underworld saw Xiao Yan execute this spell, the black light in his eyes flickered slightly. He felt that his netherworld ritual could no longer cut off the connection between Xiao Yan and the Netherworld Sea. With a thought, the power of the Book of Life and Death instantly retracted, while Yan Xinghe's evil soul was mainly responsible for resisting the impact of Xiao Yan's Tao annihilation floating life. Even so, the aura of the Book of Life and Death weakened slightly, and Yan Xinghe's body was riddled with holes. His body, which was completely condensed from light and shadow, was now in tatters. After the power of Tao annihilation and rebirth erupted, the aftermath of the Netherworld Sea's myriad calamity once again appeared. It also left many wounds on Yan Xinghe's body. Filthy blood stains stained his body, which was caused by the blood river True Water. A layer of black ice directly formed on the surface of his body, which was caused by the Nine Serenities' cold wind. A large part of his body had disappeared, but the blue-purple demon fire was still burning on his wounds, which was caused by the nether evil flame. Under the terrifying attack, Yan Xinghe's evil soul was almost completely destroyed by Xiao Yan's attack. The king of the underworld's eyes were pitch black as he stared at Xiao Yan. Even Golden Cicada, Wu Mingqi, and Shintize looked in his direction. Their hearts sank. In the Netherworld Sea, this kid is indeed ferocious. If he is allowed to completely control the Netherworld Sea, the consequences will be unimaginable. Everyone knew in their hearts that in reality this still wasn't Xiao Yan's current strongest state. Other than Wu Mingqi, who did not participate, the king of the underworld and Shintize were still disrupting his connection with Heaven's Bane and the Netherworld Sea. After breaking through the king of the underworld's netherworld ritual with one strike, severely injuring Yan Xinghe, and repelling the Book of Life and Death, Xiao Yan stood tall in the Netherworld Sea like a supreme ruler. The dark red glow in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Even his entire body was covered in a layer of dark red glow. He looked extremely ferocious and domineering. However, at this moment, the aura around Xiao Yan was fluctuating. It was extremely unstable, just like the Netherworld Sea that everyone was in. However, Xiao Yan did not seem to care about this. He continued to move forward, taking the initiative to approach the king of the underworld and the rest. His entire person was like a frenzied and irritable Netherworld Sea. The king of the underworld's expression did not change. Yan Xinghe's body, which had been weakened by the previous battle, was rapidly recovering. The injuries on his body were also recovering quickly. However, Xiao Yan's Tao annihilation rebirth technique had triggered the calamity of the Netherworld Sea, and displayed the birth and destruction of the great Tao. The power of the Tao annihilation was extremely strong. Although it was not as strong as the attack from Lin Feng's heaven exterminating sword during the war between the two worlds, it was still a huge hindrance to the recovery of Yan Xinghe's evil soul. He was unable to recover in a short period of time. The half-black, half-white life and death underworld Tao fruit above the king of the underworld's head spun. With the guidance of his magic power, Yan Xinghe's evil soul transformed into a stream of light and returned to the Tao fruit. His figure merged into the white side of the Tao fruit. As the Tao fruit spun, Yan Xinghe's figure appeared on the black side of the Tao fruit. Although Xiao Yan was brave and heroic, he did not underestimate his enemies. Xianmen Tianzong had a deep understanding of the king of the underworld's Tao orthodoxy. He knew that the life and death underworld Dao fruit was evil, and that the evil soul it refined was unique. When the Dao fruit turned back to the white side, Yan Xinghe would reappear to participate in the battle. Perhaps because the power of the Dao annihilation rebirth technique was too strong, his injuries would not be able to fully recover. However, he would be able to fight again. At the end of the day, his opponent was still the king of the underworld. Xiaoyan strode forward step by step. Calamities and tribulations revolved around his body, causing his void return stage physique to grow larger and more ferocious. The king of the underworld and Xiaoyan stared at each other. The black light in his eyes suddenly dissipated, revealing a pair of eyes that were no different from an ordinary person's. His eyes were no longer like the dark abyss. However, the fluctuations of his aura of magic power were even more terrifying. His figure also grew taller abruptly. It was not purely because his body had grown larger. Rather, the king of the underworld seemed to have reached a higher level and was able to look down on heaven and earth. Beneath his feet, a huge black three-tiered altar silently rose from the ground. The black-robed emperor who stood atop it seemed to rule over the three worlds of heaven, earth, and man. If Xiaoyan had not received the power of the dark sea to strengthen his body, he would have been shaken to the core and would not have been able to calm his heart. The king of the underworld's eyes were filled with indifference. He extended his hands forward. One hand was as white as jade, while the other was as black as ink. As the king of the underworld brought his palms together, a black and white wheel appeared and floated in the void. As the wheel spun, everything around it changed as if they were about to wither and die. Even the various vicious calamities and tribulations in the dark sea seemed to be divided into two states: life and death. It was as if the difference between life and death had been forcefully established. And under the effect of the mighty mystique of the king of the underworld that spun the mysteries of life and death, everything around him was thrown into a state of death. In an instant, even the calamities and tribulations in the dark sea seemed to be unable to cause any harm to the king of the underworld. Xiaoyan howled into the sky, stirring up the power of the dark sea and activating the art of annihilation of life and death once again. You have the Tao of life and death, so I will destroy your orthodoxy. The destructive power seemed endless as it attacked the king of the underworld. The king of the underworld said indifferently, "Sacrifice." The black and white wheel in front of him spun even faster at that moment. 3 empty life and death underworld Tao fruits flew out and formed a huge black altar in the dark sea. The black and white wheel flew into the altar and turned to dust without a sound. The power of the black altar became even more majestic, even more vast, and even more evil. The king of the underworld said slowly, "Before me, all is silent." The black altar instantly turned into a black barrier, blocking in front of the king of the underworld. This barrier did not emit any aura at all. It did not have any powerful waves of dharmic power, nor did it have any strong intent. But as this black barrier stood there, it seemed to isolate the realm, preventing the king of the underworld from seeing any danger or tribulation. Time and space seemed to distort at that moment. The attacks that came from other directions all landed on the barrier in front of the king of the underworld, and were blocked by this black barrier. However, Xiaoyan's violent art of annihilation of life and the power of the dark sea blasted on it, causing cracks to appear on the black barrier. The cracks spread slowly and steadily, extending across the entire surface of the black barrier. Behind the barrier, the underworld emperor watched this scene indifferently. The half-black, half-white life and death nether Tao fruit above his head spun, and Yan Xinghe's figure appeared within it. The black half turned to the white half, and then Yan Xinghe stepped out of the Tao fruit. The king of the underworld opened his palm, and the book of life and death appeared on it. Rays of gray light shot up into the sky. At that moment, Xiaoyan's expression gradually turned violent and impatient. He looked at the book of life and death and Yan Xinghe, who had appeared behind the black barrier, with a cold gaze. As he communicated with the dark sea and activated the art of annihilation of life, his other hand opened. Other than the dark evil flame and the mysterious heavenly tribulation flame, many other types of true fire appeared and gathered in his palm. A small, exquisite, and extremely terrifying flame lotus began to condense in his palm. The destructive and terrifying energy waves surged, shaking the entire void of the dark sea. At that moment, the red light pillar formed by the power of heavenly calamity faded, revealing its true appearance. It was a huge stone pillar. This stone pillar did not give off a mellow and heavy feeling. Instead, it exuded an extremely sharp aura. It was like a peerless divine weapon. Silently, it stood there, unmoving amidst the calamities of the dark sea. However, it was like the source of chaos, the source of calamity, and the source of destruction. Two mysterious and ancient words, heavenly calamity, appeared faintly on the surface of the stone pillar. As heavenly calamity truly appeared, the chaos in the dark sea intensified. Even the ring-shaped bounded domain space, which was formed from the fusion of many dark sea realms, became unstable. Shi Tianhao was fighting Golden Cicada. At this moment, he turned to look at Xiao Yan and frowned slightly. Although eldest senior brother has become an almighty who has survived the calamity, activating the art of annihilation of life and the celestial flaming lotus at the same time would be fine in the vast thousand domains. But now he has to activate the power of the dark sea. This is beyond his current limits. After all, eldest senior brother has not completely controlled the dark sea. At this moment, the hearts of everyone present changed. They suddenly felt a strange existence. Especially Xiao Yan, who had the deepest connection with the dark sea. His expression was one of shock and surprise. It seemed to be right in front of them, but also seemed to be far away. The dark sea-bounded domain space actually began to shake violently. It was as if a huge crack was about to break open in the void of heaven and earth. A crack appeared in the dark void of heaven and earth. The white light manifested by the power of the bounded domain space within the crack flashed continuously. Finally, the space was torn open to both sides. The dark sea-bounded domain space actually cracked open at this moment. When everyone's divine senses swept over, they discovered that the crack in the dark sea did not lead to the vast thousand domains. Chapter 14:19. Although the Nether Sea realm was stable, and the natural disasters and tribulations did not flow out, it would occasionally break apart. Everyone fought in the Nether Sea, causing the Nether Sea's tribulations to become more violent and chaotic. Naturally, the impact on the realm was greater, but if the Nether Sea was completely chaotic, it would undoubtedly be a great danger to those within it. Hence, both sides tried their best to control the storm near Tian Air. Even Xiao Yan, who was using the power of the Nether Sea to strengthen himself, did not forget to maintain the stability of the realm. To him, he had to control the power of the Nether Sea as much as possible, and not make it more chaotic. Previously, when the Nether Sea had been disturbed by the heaven-crushing sword, a crack had appeared in the Nether Sea, but it had quickly healed under everyone's tacit understanding. Now the Nether Sea had suddenly cracked, and everyone was slightly surprised. At the same time, the cracked Nether Sea did not lead to the divine land. On the other side of the crack it was pitch black. Faint starlight flickered, but there was more darkness. The dark void was not calm, but as chaotic and complex as the Nether Sea. The chaos of space-time was even more agitated than the Nether Sea. This time, the Nether Sea had cracked open, and the place it led to was the Void Sea, one of the 7 seas of heavenly origin. The Void Battlefield. Shi Tianhao's eyes were filled with astonishment, as if he had thought of something. His expression changed dramatically. As the void cracked open, the netherworld wind, true water of the netherworld, mysterious heaven tribulation flame, and other disasters poured into the endless void. But the crack was extremely chaotic, and space-time was distorted. As the disasters of the Nether Sea poured into the Void Sea, something from the Void Sea also poured into the Nether Sea. Those were formless void storms of enormous scale. The terrifying space turbulence even stirred up the calamities and tribulations of the Netherworld Sea at the entrance, forming countless vacuum areas. They were like empty scars, appearing extremely dazzling in the Netherworld Sea that was densely covered with calamities and tribulations. Xiao Yan, the Emperor of the Underworld, Golden Cicada and the others all understood. So that's how it is. A rarely seen large-scale storm has been stirred up in this area of the battlefield of the void, forming a resonance with the surging tides of the Nether Sea. The domain of the Void Sea itself is extremely unstable. At a certain time, both sides have reached their peak, and working together, the domain barrier is broken. Xiao Yan turned his head to look, only to find that Shi Tianhao was looking at the void storm with some fear. To Xiao Yan, it was rare to see Shi Tianhao in such a state. With a thought, he abruptly came back to his senses and fixed his gaze on the domain crack. The void storm that rushed into the netherworld sea also swept up some other things. There were many huge rocks in the void battlefield, and they all looked strange. These rocks looked as small as grains of sand between the vast netherworld sea and the void sea domain. But in fact, they were extremely huge. They were like floating continents, or even small planets. For them to be able to survive in such a terrifying void storm, and not be turned into dust, the surface of these rocks all flashed with a glossy luster. Within the luster, there were large numbers of divine runes. The vast majority of these runes were not left behind by humans, but were naturally formed by heaven and earth. The glow protected the rocks, allowing them to survive in the storm. However, these rocks were only a minority. Most of them did not produce natural spiritual energy, or their natural spiritual energy was not strong enough. They had long been crushed by the storm, no longer existing. In the void battlefield, if a cultivator with a lower cultivation encountered a large-scale void storm, and did not have the protection of a powerhouse, their only chance to save themselves would be these giant rocks. Some people who hid in the void battlefield would also choose one of these rocks as a foothold. However, the void storm before them was too vast, and it seemed to be getting more and more intense. Even after rushing into the netherworld sea, it did not dissipate. Those huge rocks that were protected by the spiritual light were also being worn down, and the rocks themselves were starting to break. Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao stared at those huge rocks, and saw that there was a cave abode on the largest one. The spiritual light on the surface of the huge rock was about to dissipate, and the cave abode and the huge rock were about to be destroyed by the void storm. At this time, a tall elder with messy hair walked out of the cave abode. He looked solemnly at the spiritual light on the surface of the huge rock, and the spiritual light on the surface of the huge rock was getting weaker and weaker. He looked around and barely saw the illusion of the netherworld see through the turbulence of the storm. At first he was surprised, but then he smiled and said, "This looks like the netherworld sea. I didn't think that I would finally have the chance to leave the void sea. I came out of the tiger's mouth and into the wolf's den, but this life is not in vain. I just don't know if I can survive and return to the vast thousand domains." "Grandfather," a voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Separated by the void storm, he could not hear it clearly, but it made all the hair on Shi Zhongtian's body stand on end. In the void storm, he was dizzy and disoriented. He tried hard to distinguish the source of the voice, and vaguely saw a tall and handsome young man in the netherworld sea. He looked like himself, and even more like his son, Shi Xiling. Even though Shi Zhongtian had never seen Shi Tianhao like this, he would not mistake him for someone else. He just felt that it was ridiculous and unbelievable. He thought that it was an illusion created by the void battlefield or the netherworld sea. But when he saw Xiao Yan, the king of the underworld, Golden Cicada and the others, and that both sides were engaged in a chaotic battle, Shi Zhongtian no longer doubted it. However, he could not care less about reuniting with Shi Tianhao at this moment. He was still enveloped by the void storm, and he was in a precarious situation. Although he did not know Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao's opponents, he only knew that they were his grandson's enemies. Shi Zhongtian's hair and beard were standing on end. He looked extremely mighty, but the light in his eyes was not reckless. He retreated back into the cave abode. Although he could not see through the level of the battle between Shi Tianhao and the others, he was still in the void storm at the moment, and he was in a precarious situation. How could he help them? There was only one way, and that was to make use of the terrifying storm that put him in danger. The cause of this storm was because he had been trapped in this cave abode, and he had caused trouble in order to escape. Although he could not protect himself, the huge rock where the cave abode was located was like the eye of the storm, and he could make use of it. As for his own safety, Shi Zhongtian did not care. Even if there was a chance to reunite with his grandson, the old man would not hesitate to kill his enemies first. The void storm was chaotic, and it did not care where it was directed. It only wanted to crush and destroy everything in its path. Howard dodged quickly. The cave abode where Shi Zhongtian was immediately lit up, and the void storm that was full of destructive intent pressed down on the king of the underworld, Golden Cicada, and the others. The void storm was extremely violent. When Wu Mengqi and Shen Tuze saw it, their expressions became very solemn. However, the king of the underworld, Golden Cicada, and Yan Xinghe were relatively calm. Instead, they took advantage of the distraction of Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao to launch an attack and gain the upper hand. However, Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao looked at each other, and sparks flashed in their eyes at the same time. Eldest senior brother, let's go. Shi Tianhao suddenly retracted his body of the rage god, and once again transformed into his body of the raging god. The sky all heavens array unfolded, with Sky City in the center, and the great celestial wheel hanging high above. Shi Tianhao's raging essence body landed on the city wall of Sky City, his eyes shining as he looked at the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada. In the next moment, the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada frowned slightly. They only felt a thunderous rumble in the void where their bodies resided, as if the void had been blasted apart by a thunderbolt. This formless void thunder had no trajectory to follow. It came and went without a trace and without warning, just like that. It was Shi Tianhao's 9 heavens formless void thunder tribulation. Although Shi Tianhao's thunder technique was strange and powerful, the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada reacted in time, suppressing the void with all their might and dispelling the formless thunder. However, this was just a means, not Shi Tianhao's true goal. Guided by this formless thunder, the vast void storm began to clearly point at the king of the underworld and the others, roaring down. Even though Shi Zhongtian could influence the void storm in the cave abode, it was far inferior to Shi Tianhao's accurate determination of the void storm's direction. He also concentrated the void storm's power and prevented it from dissipating. This void storm resonated with the 9 heavens formless void thunder tribulation. It began to continuously shatter the space in the netherworld sea, causing the void storm to grow stronger and stronger, its momentum expanding continuously. This was Shi Tianhao's killing move. The king of the underworld and Golden Cicada, who had been able to maintain their calm previously, now looked solemn. They saw the storm pouncing on them becoming stronger and stronger, as if it had the power to sweep through the netherworld sea. However, its power was concentrated on one point, and under the guidance of Shi Tianhao's 9 heavens formless void thunder tribulation, it attacked them. Protect your old man. Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao had been fellow disciples for many years, so he knew him very well. When Shi Tianhao first made his move, he already knew what he was thinking. When Shi Tianhao activated the 9 heavens formless void thunder tribulation, Xiao Yan put his palms together and slowly pushed them forward. The art of the annihilation of Tao rebirth was once again unleashed. In the underworld sea, which had already been stirred up by the storm of void, thousands of calamities and tribulations surged at the same time, pouncing toward the emperor of the underworld and Golden Cicada along with the storm of void. The frenzied storm blended with thousands of calamities and tribulations, stirring up huge waves in the netherworld sea. The huge crack between the netherworld sea and the empty sea not only showed no signs of healing, but it was also growing wider. As the storm circulated, under Shi Tianhao's special guidance, its target became only one. While its destructive power became more condensed, it also became slightly more orderly. The eye of the storm in particular was relatively calm. After Shi Tianhao activated the 9 heavens formless void thunder tribulation, he immediately activated the great celestial wheel, carrying him into the eye of the storm. The 12 immortal generals' spiritual bodies formed by the blue sky all heavens formation instantly turned into 12 metal men, fixing the eye of the storm together with the city in the sky. Then Shi Tianhao stretched out his palm, which became extremely huge, covering the sky and the moon, and sucked in the huge rock where Shi Zhongtian was. Then he did not retreat from the storm, allowing the void storm to cause damage to him. The power of the 12 metal men and the city in the sky reversed together, causing the storm to become even more violent, rushing towards the king of the underworld and the others together with the storm. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.